SDWAC, Carl Nettleton, who will be this morning's moderator. Carl Nettleton is an award-winning writer, speaker, thought partner, facilitator, subject matter expert regarding water, climate, sustainability, the ocean, and binational U.S. and Mexico border affairs. As a good friend and knowledgeable expert, we appreciate Carl accepting the critical role of moderating this morning's panel event. Carl, thank you, and I turn the mic over to you. Enjoy your morning.
Thank you, Christine. It's a delight to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to moderate this session. I've been involved professionally with border sewage issues in the border generally for since about the 1980s. So it's really great to have an opportunity to help bring folks together again and see so many good friends. Today's session should be interesting and lively. We've got seven great panelists whose expertise we can draw on. Here's a brief outline of what to expect. I'm going to give a short, historical, very short, and geographical overview of the issue, and then introduce the first panelist. Two of the panelists will provide a macro view of the situation. Then our second panel will answer the question, why are we here and why is it important? We'll take a break after the second panel and then have 1 hour for questions and answers addressing the theme, what is the solution? And we'll start with some questions I have for the panelists and allow plenty of time for the audience to engage in the discussion. We'll wrap up at noon with concluding remarks by Catherine Greenberg. Couple of rules of participation. First of all, please respect the opinions of others, even if you don't share that opinion. And second, when you ask a question, please avoid editorializing and be crisp in making your point so others will have time to speak too. I can move the slides. Yeah, that's me. So the first two slides are, this first one is the Tijuana, the Tijuana River watershed. It's 1,750 square miles, and nearly every presentation I've seen leads off with this watershed image. And the sewage, cross-border sewage issue is a big issue, but it's not a 1,750 square mile issue. It's an issue that's focused in the northwest corner of the watershed in the urban area of Tijuana. And just so you get a good view of where the binational cross-border piece of it is, sorry, I'm not touching it. There are several places where the sewage, contaminated stormwater, trash, and sediment come across the border. From left to right, Yogurt Canyon, Los Laureles Canyon, which becomes Goat Canyon in the United States, Matadoros Canyon, which becomes Smuggler's Gulch in the United States, Del Sol, and Central are sold as drain. And then the Tijuana River main channel, which we're all familiar with. So it's important to know that this is where the cross-border crossings happen. There's another point is that the San Antonio de los Buenos wastewater plant, you can see it down there on the left side, is failing. And so raw sewage goes into the ocean there. So another place where the U.S. beaches and Tijuana's beaches are affected are there. In the summer, the currents move the sewage up the coast. And then just a minor detail on the far right, there have been 2 water reclamation plants that have been built in Tijuana in the last 20 years. They treat water to U.S. standards, to my understanding, but like in the U.S., they don't have the ability to distribute it all. So what's not distributed goes into the Tijuana River channel and goes downstream. So that's a brief overview of that. Oops, wrong direction. I'm not going to read all the text on here, but you can maybe look at it while I speak. There's some real parallels between, so do I do it again? The first slide, there's 2 slides here. The first slide is sort of the history in the 20th century. And there's some parallels that are really interesting. We talk about Tijuana sewage, we talk about how bad it is coming to the U.S., but we don't talk very much about our own history of sewage on this side, and there's some really unique parallels. First, we share a lot of things, the border, the river, the economy, families, culture, water supply from the Colorado River and the ocean, but we also share a similar history with sewage treatment. In the early part of the 20th century, both countries were dumping sewage into the environment. Tijuana was doing it into the river, San Diego was doing it in San Diego Bay. They did that for decades. San Diego built a sewage plant in San Diego Bay in 1943. The Navy actually built it to protect the sailors, middle of World War II, and it failed. spilling 15 million gallons of sewage into the bay every year. Tijuana sewage plant in San Antonio de los Buenos, which I've already mentioned, is failing, spilling millions of gallons into the ocean also. When San Diego built the Point Loma wastewater treatment plant in 1963 to get sewage out of the bay, sewage from Tijuana was pumped there. The new plant in San Diego cleaned up the bay, but it caused a new problem. The wastewater effluent, which would flow into the kelp beds 40% of the time, not meeting California ocean plant standards, and that required building a longer outfall 2 miles so that wouldn't happen anymore. Similarly, when the South Bay International wastewater plant was built, it provided relief, but it didn't meet US and California water standards. It created another place where we needed a new milestone to upgrade it to secondary treatment so that it met US standards. San Diego built 2 water reclamation plants between 1997 and 2002 and couldn't use all of the capacity because, as I said, it didn't have the distribution capacity. Tijuana built 2 water reclamation plants, one in 2009 and another in 2011, and couldn't use all the capacity because they didn't have a distribution system. And they send the excess into the Tijuana River channel. Between 2017 and now, millions of gallons of sewage, go to the second slide, moving to the 21st century, millions of gallons of sewage have flowed across the border from, oh, this is really twitchy.
You're done.
I wasn't even touching it. Between 2017 and now, millions of gallons of sewage have flowed across the border from multiple pipeline breaks, as we all know, and sewage infrastructure failures in Tijuana. This is reminiscent of the scale and scope of the failures of San Diego's sewage system in the 1980s and the early 1990s. Things like in the Penasquitos Lagoon, the pump station would regularly flood and put millions of gallons into the sewage, which went into the sea. Mission Valley, throughout, I was working at the wastewater department then, and I remember the efforts that had to be made to fix that system. When San Diego's 1.4 billion sewer upgrade came about in part because of legal action which fixed the pipes, it came about in part because of treatment, because of legal action. In the same way, the $474 million that I'm sure Sally, Spener, and others are going to talk about for Tijuana projects came about in part because of legal action. The point here is that San Diego and Tijuana sewer infrastructure have evolved in different time frames, but share the same problems when you look at those time frames in parallel. So here's hoping our discussion today will lead to continued improvement and collaboration so the cross-border sewage issues can continue to see important milestones of improvement. And now here's a high-level look at some of the bigger projects anticipated in the coming years. I'm not going to do any detail on this, but just so you have a framework. I know it's hard to understand if you're not familiar with this. I didn't touch it. I really didn't. I just touched the counter. Number 1, you can see is the International Wastewater Treatment Plant, which is going to be doubled in size. That's north of the border. Number 2 is the San Antonio de los Buenos plant, the Punta Bandera. Pump Station 1A and 1B are numbers 3 there that need to be upgraded and will be. Pump Station Sila is number 4. Substation number 5 is there's a pickup point that takes water in dry weather out of the Tijuana River, and it picks up the water reclamation plant effluent that's put into the river. That's what that arrow is pointing to, and it comes downstream. So those are kind of the big basic pieces. You can see that the issue that we really need to deal with are this infrastructure, the pipelines in this central area and where it crosses into the border. And if we can focus on that and understand what needs to be done, we can go a long way together to try to fix these problems as we're already doing. And now I'm done. Thank you. Let's see who the next slide is. Let's go the right way. There we go, Richard King. So our first panel is going to be a macro view of the situation. And our first speaker is going to be Richard Kai. Richard began working at US EPA in 1991. God, I did not touch it.
Let's fix
She's
it.
got it over there. In 1991, after seeing cross-border hazardous management issues in the early days of the border boom, as the industry was growing and maquiladoras were coming online. He's had important roles in the U.S. Departments of Energy and State, in the office of a number of international corporations, always focused on Latin America and the environment. As the CEO of the Institute of the Americas, Richard promotes sound public policy and fosters cooperation between stakeholders across the hemisphere. He previously led the International Community Foundation for 14 years. He'll discuss how the success of solving Tijuana sewage crisis fits into our future as the busiest binational region in the world. Richard, I give the clicker to you.
How does this?
No,
It goes up and down.
Well, good morning. First of all, I want to thank Christine and the World Affairs Council for this opportunity to speak about this important issue about our binational region and the San Diego-Tijuana sewage issue. I've been asked to speak about how solving the crisis fits into our regional future. So I want to start really by providing some context about our region. We live in a very dynamic binational region. It's the largest binational metroplex in North America with 5.2 million people, just in the San Diego-Tijuana region. If you look at the Cali-Baja region, you're looking at over 7 million people. It's a very, very dynamic regional economy with a lot of interdependencies that go both ways. We have family members that here in San Diego that have family across the border, and we have 65,000 people that are cross-border commuters daily coming northbound to San Diego, in part because of the high cost of housing in San Diego, and because there's a lot of attractiveness to living south of the border. So it's important to understand our region as one that is really interconnected. Also, in terms of cross-border trade, we have over $4 billion of cross-border commerce. We're the busiest border crossing in the Western Hemisphere. And we've got and the region has a gross regional product of over $230 billion. That's in terms of the Cali-Baja region. So I think as we look at this problem, we need to look at it in the context of the interdependencies and the importance of the overall binational region, as opposed to looking at it as a singular environmental issue, because we need to solve this issue together. Now, if I want to go back in time and provide some context, this is a photo of Tijuana, the Tijuana-San Diego border in 1910. As you can see, at that time, Tijuana had a population of 7,000 people. San Diego County had a population of 61,000 plus. We had salmon flowing up this river. When people crossed the border, they had carriage buggies that would literally cross the border, and the horses went basically waist deep in water to get people across. And these were simpler times. I put together a historic timeline, very similar to what Carl did, but in the context of population growth, because I think it's really important to sort of look at this problem, really from the standpoint of the history over time. And I'll pass you slides to those that want it later. I started my professional career here on the border, working for the Economic Development Corporation of San Diego. Malin Burnham was on our board. I was in my mid-20s, and my job was to work with foreign and U.S. companies to attract them to our binational region to establish twin plants. I was involved in helping bring Casio and Canon to the region. Hirakawa Electric, Casio and Canon moving in Asia afterwards with the ship to China. But nevertheless, a number of companies were brought here, and I was very involved in that whole early days before even the Otay Mesa border crossing was constructed. But that experience also helped me appreciate that there were also environmental issues, and there were issues related to hazardous waste that needed to be addressed, and that drew me to work for EPA. So I moved from San Diego, my hometown, to Washington, and I became the special assistant for U.S.-Mexico Border Affairs at the Office of International Activities, EPA. And during that time, it was at the beginning of the negotiations for NAFTA. The environmental issues were key at that point. And in fact, the border became a sticking point in being able to get NAFTA approved. And so one of the key facets of NAFTA, at least from the US side, was securing critical funding for the South Bay International Wastewater Treatment Plant. So when I was at EPA, I was involved in the lobbying efforts on the Hill. Actually, it was called lobbying, it's not a federal official, but we were advocating for that plant. And we were working with stakeholders here in San Diego to ensure that that funding was in place so that it would support the approval of the agreement. Now, I think it's important to also mention that that approval was not contingent, was not a direct tie to the agreement, because the environment, in fact, we did a side agreement to the environment, to the NAFTA, and it complemented the agreement, but it was not integral to the agreement that was signed by the three countries. And I'll get to the USMC in a bit, but I think it's important to put that in context. Now look at, on this timeline here, there's some interesting dates. First, in 1935, Tijuana built its first septic facility to service 5,000 people. But at that time, they had a little over 11,000. Fast forward to the 70s. Well, actually in the 50s, we began having cross-border issues. San Diego began complaining about the sewage flows north of the border. It got to a point where in the 80s, there was a critical need to begin to address the problem. Actually, in the 60s, San Diego offered Tijuana the ability to take some of its emergency sewage flow, and San Diego started processing at the Point Loma plant Tijuana's excess. So that was an escape valve, and it led to Tijuana being able to solve that problem for the time being. But it got to a point where the growth of Tijuana, in part because of the growth in the industrial base of Tijuana and the draw of those job opportunities, led to a population growth, as you can see, where by the time we got to the late 80s, early 90s, Tijuana's growth rate was far exceeding that of the city of San Diego. And we had a tipping point where Tijuana exceeded the growth of the city of San Diego, not the county, but the city. And so that's why the South Bay wastewater treatment plant was so important to be able to put in place, because San Diego could not afford to keep taking Tijuana's wastewater. San Diego was growing as well. San Diego was building North City West, which became Carmel Valley. They needed Point Loma to be able to accommodate its growth. So if you look at this in a regional context, the South Bay treatment plant was very important, but it was only a primary treatment facility. There was a lawsuit that came forward in, I believe it was 2008, that led to ultimately secondary treatment being put in place in 2011. And then fast forward to today, we had the passage of the USMCA. And as part of the USMCA, there was $300 million that was put in place by the US government to support the upgrading of facilities here on this side of the border, as well as Mexico's commitment to put money into the upgrades of some of the facilities that Carl spoke about. This is important because, as you can see from this next slide, Tijuana, by the time we finished the first facility, the growth of Tijuana and its sewage volume far exceeded the capacity. The first phase South Bay plant was only built for 25 million gallons a day. But by the time it was completed, we were looking at sewage volumes of 40 for all of Tijuana. Now, granted, we had the facility that Tijuana was managing in Punta Banderas. But as Carl explained, there's also been issues with maintenance, and that facility eventually broke down, and that's leading to a lot of the sewage discharges, which is impacting beaches from Imperial Beach to Coronado. This is actually also an image of Lorella's Canyon, which is another problem, which is immediately in front of the South Bay plant and one of the other sources of pollution. This is an informal settlement that has grown tremendously over the last 20 years. And it's an intractable problem because the majority of these people are living in squatter settlements, and the water all runs downhill. The unfortunate thing for San Diego is that, of course, we're downhill from this problem. So what we have today is a situation where, and this is actually a slide taken from a beach advisory. Can you fix the slides here? The slide of the beach advisory from 2 days ago. And you can see that there are beach advisories from Coronado all the way down to Imperial Beach. The total number of closed days last year was over 220 for Imperial Beach. Coronado has been impacted during the summer months because during the summer months, the flow goes north. And so this is an issue that really is impacting not just quality of life, but also our economy. Because the Hotel del Coronado is one of our real assets for our region and from a tourist perspective. And if people can't enjoy that beach, that impacts their bottom line. And so this is an issue that we really do need to address. Now, we can't just focus on the sewage because without looking at this problem holistically, we aren't dealing with the bigger issue of water resource management and drought. We have a number of emerging crises that we need to solve together. One is how we're going to strengthen our region from the standpoint of climate resiliency, and how we're going to deal with our future drought. Because while we've had historic rains, that doesn't mean that they're going to continue forever. And I think if you look at the water levels in the Rodriguez Dam or in Lake Mead, I think you'll appreciate the fact that we need to do a better job of conserving water and looking for innovative ways to avoid having all that water going to the Pacific. Now, San Diego has taken the lead in developing its pure water project. So now San Diego has tertiary treatment to recycle water. We need to be looking at innovative solutions for Tijuana to do the same. And also respecting the fact that we have an estuary that is truly unique. It's actually the largest wetland in Southern California. And it's actually the largest intact wetland that remains from Point Conception south. So we need to balance these issues of water scarcity, maintaining the habitat and biodiversity of that wetland. But I think if you see it, the growth of Tijuana over the past 90 years and where we are today, I think there's a sufficient volume of water to be able to effectively treat and also be able to conserve some of that water. Because I think that if we don't do that, we're going to have a bigger issue that both cities are going to be contending with. I also want to just close by saying that unlike the NAFTA, the USMCA now has an environmental chapter with real teeth. It also has labor visions with teeth, and you're going to hear about that from Kevin in a bit. I mention this because if you look at the recent reports of the wastewater coming across the Tijuana River, you'll also see, if you read some of the IBWC reports, that there are levels of heavy metals now. The report that IBWC indicates say that they're within U.S. and Mexican standards. But I think the issue here is that if you have levels of heavy metals, VOCs, and or coliform that exceed acceptable standards in Mexico, you can have an issue that could be brought against Mexico through the USMCA as a tool. So that is a difference from when I worked on the NAFTA originally, is that today there's an effective mechanism to address some of this non-compliance. And It's one that could have, I think, real impacts on our economy. So I think it's one that we do need to sort of solve together. I should remind you also that the secondary wastewater treatment facility that was built for the South Bay, as well as the ocean outfall, those were a consequence of lawsuits on the US side. So just as US NGOs, environmental groups have brought lawsuits to address the environmental issues on this side of the border, the same can happen in Mexico because of the USMCA today. So I'll close with that, and I think we're gonna have a rich discussion. There's a lot to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Great background. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Kevin Cassidy, who's the Director and Representative to the Bretton Woods and Multilateral Organizations for the International Labor Organizations Office for the United States. He's all the way here from Washington, D.C. to join us today and got a tour of the border yesterday, I understand. And the ILO is a United Nations agency that advances social and economic justice by setting international labor standards, which has relevance, as Richard pointed out. He also served at the Aga Khan Foundation, focused on rural and community-based development in Central and South Asia. I know this bio doesn't do justice to his rich background, but he's going to discuss the impact of interdependent border economies, cross-border labor flows, and the maquiladora economy, and how this plays into environmental issues. So please welcome Kevin Cassidy.
Thank you very much, Richard, and thanks to the San Diego World Affairs Council for having me here today. I don't presume to know it all. I'm more comfortable actually speaking about potable water in Delhi, or water for cotton harvesting in Uzbekistan, or access to water in sub-Saharan Africa, or e-waste in Asia. But today I'll hope to cover economic growth and social progress, the business activity that is generated through that, and labor migration for the person power to work in these factories, as well as the health component, both human and environmental. The ILO and the UN system itself is generally driven by our sustainable development goals. And here, the issues that you're facing in terms of the environmental degradation, or the access to water, or the sanitation issues as well, are well reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals number 6 and 11, if you wish to look at that. Just quickly on the ILO, we are the oldest UN agency. We come out of the Treaty of Versailles alongside the League of Nations. We have 187 member states, like the 36 agencies and programs that make up the UN system. We are a membership-based organization. The US is a member of that. We also are quite unique in the sense that we are a tripartite organization. So most UN agencies are intergovernmental. We work with not only the governments, but also the workers and employers. So when we're negotiating international conventions, it will be the unions such as AFL-CIO or SEIU at the table, but there will also be Coca-Cola, Walmart, and Disney. So what comes out of those discussions are actually the actors of the real economy deciding what we can and we cannot do. In addition to that, we have a normative role. We create these international conventions, and once ratified, they have to be followed by the countries. And we do have a supervisory mechanism that does follow up. And if, in fact, countries do not live up to those provisions, there are consequences for that. In terms of our footprint, we do have offices in Mexico and throughout the region. We are particularly interested in global supply chains, so the business is quite important to us. The World Trade Organization recognizes the ILO as the competent agency on the labor provisions. With many of the trade agreements in USMCA, the discussions going on for the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework reference the ILO and our fundamental principles and rights at work. But for those who may know the RUGI principles, that comes out of the ILO's fundamental principles, EU due diligence laws. So what we're seeing is that these bad actors in the world are being constrained from polluting the environment, from treating workers badly, and having unsustainable development. For the Mexican maquiladoras, and again, there are probably people here who know much more than I do about this, they're engaged in labor-intensive assembly and intermediate and final goods for exports. The sector reflects a globalized world that is promoting technology development, and there's a growing need for countries to participate in international markets. Participating effectively in global markets also requires a steady stream of skilled workers that is largely satisfied by labor migration, another big issue I think that you face here as well too, and across the border. The maquiladoras specialize in relatively labor-intensive side of production, while in the US we engage more in the capital intensive part of that process. It also creates jobs not only in manufacturing and in warehousing, transportation, logistics, and real estate services. And the fastest growing sectors right now are in transportation equipment, paper, plastics, rubber products, fabricated metal products, and primary metal manufacturing. It's also relatively high wage and high productivity. So this is very important because it attracts workers. We see that about 70%, some estimates look at 70% of the labor force in Mexico is in the informal economy. So really important to have a regular job, a secure job. This is what attracts people to that. Maquiladoras represent about 20% of the economy and 90% of the exports. It generates 3 million formal jobs. It is one of the sectors that recovers the fastest from the pandemic and one of the most in demand for labor because of its labor-intensive components. But the gaps in the migrant populations make it difficult to employ effectively. These are issues such as work permits, access to the labor market, access to banking. And besides the auto parts and automobile manufacturing, the maquiladoras are also including electronics, medical devices, aircraft parts and machinery, and now increasingly engineering services. So in the wake of the COVID pandemic, supply chain issues had affected not only this part of the world, the automotive sector, but about 81% of the global workforce was out of work for about 6 months. And this was an amazing eye-opening moment where we saw that a small pathogen can go in and basically shut down the entire global economy. Mexico has 13 free trade agreements with 50 countries, including USMCA. As was mentioned just a bit earlier, we were talking about there's an environmental chapter in the USMCA, which includes commitments to implement key multilateral environmental agreements, plus the labor provisions. The USTR Trade Representative Catherine Tai works with our office quite closely. She presciently put into the trade agreements these labor provisions, which look at eliminating child labor, eliminating forced labor, eliminating discrimination in the workplace, looking at collective bargaining and freedom of association issues, as well as occupational safety and health. So these are some of the labor elements within the USMCA, and I'm told also will be reflected in the upcoming Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. So very important labor elements to these trade agreements. There is actually a labor attaché in Mexico City. So if you have any concerns or questions, you can always go and see Carlos Romero, who is sitting there. Don't tell him I told you to see him, but certainly he can answer some of those questions. The border states in Sonora and Baja California represent 62% of the total maquiladora employment. And the states, and looking at the structure, the states adjacent to Texas produce largely automotive-related parts, whereas those states near California and Arizona specialize in consumer and business electronics. And the reason that's important because there'll be different type of waste and different types of runoff. So when you have electronics and so, you're going to have a lot more chemicals. There's a lot more occupational safety and health issues that need to be looked at. So a lot of this is really quite new to everyone because the world is a globalized world. You have international buyers and local suppliers. So that model was actually called into question when COVID-19 struck. Many of us couldn't get regular consumer goods. Those who were waiting for vanities from the big box stores or waiting for your car with those chips that would have these special functionality in the cars. All of that was put on the back foot. So now I think companies are looking at sort of global supply chain 4.0. How do we have visibility from the harvesting or the mining of primary products to the final disposition of that product itself? The technological changes that are taking place right now, we're seeing it in software and advances in autonomous driving, the accelerated convergence of automotive manufacturing to technology, and it's delivering a significant supplier value. So we're going to be seeing a change from, particularly in automotives, away from transmission and brakes and axles and exhaust systems, more towards the demand for electric powertrains, batteries, advanced driver assistance, sensors, infotainment, and communications. So the nature of those companies are going to be changing, and the processes will be changing as well too. The U.S.-Mexico manufacturing relationship, like many other global supply chains, were decades in the making, and it's not going to change just overnight. And automotive manufacturers are planning their conversion to EV production. I know here in California, there are some pushes to get rid of the gas-powered vehicles. That's going to be major changes. And then, of course, all the employment that comes with charging stations and all the other types of activities moving on. For example, General Motors has announced last year that they will invest $1 billion in their factories in Mexico. Ford has recently begun producing the Mustang Mach-E and are building new plants. And China's contemporary Eporex technology, the world's biggest manufacturer of batteries for electrical vehicles, will also be looking at plants in Mexico. So a possible $5 billion investment. So this is massive investment. This is massive need for skilled workers. And of course, on this side in the discussion we're looking at today is the waste coming out of that. Post-COVID-19, although the data does not confirm this yet, the maquiladoras may benefit largely from this much discussed reshoring or nearshoring for manufacturing, but also the sort of geopolitics with China and looking at those trade disputes. Nearshoring will not happen overnight. It takes a long time to retool these factories, long time in business, maybe not for government side, but certainly it will take time to do. The USMCA has applied new pressure on the maquiladoras, restrictions on the origin of steel, aluminum, vehicle parts, and new requirements governing labor and wages. Just to pause there a quick second, about 18 months ago, almost 2 years ago now, the ILO was contacted by the US Trade Representative's Office. They wanted the ILO to come down to Silao, to a very big manufacturing plant in Guanajuato, to look at the validation vote of a collective bargaining agreement that was taking place due to some irregularities. What that actually means in English is to say that people didn't know what their contracts were, what they were being paid. There was contract substitution. People were considering wage theft was going on. So the ILO was asked to come in and be an observer. We do not form that monitoring role, but we were there as an international observer. And the feedback we had both from the Department of Labor, the Department of State, and from USTR is that the ILO, because it's an international organization, provided a calming effect on what was being seen as a lot of rabble-rousing going on the ground, and people whipping things up on both sides of the equation. We had resolution on that, and then subsequent to that, a number of other cases that were being brought on what's called a rapid response mechanism, which is a plant facility specific measure in the USMCA, which allows you to address the problems at a factory level instead of scuppering the whole deal of the trade agreement itself. The USMCA, the Mexican government is posing new challenges in looking at electricity generation, rules that are favoring state-run utilities. So the cheap power sources are now going away and businesses are going to pay higher costs. The labor market regulations are changing, so it's pushing up the labor costs. We've seen that in China in the past as well. That's why we're looking for new places to go and produce goods around the world as an alternative to China, and also given, as I mentioned, some of the geopolitical issues as well. So what are the changes coming over the horizon? We see that COVID-19, the supply chain issues, the nearshoring is playing an important role, and integrating production processes close to the countries of consumption. So that's the theory. Whether it'll work in reality is another story. Companies' interest is growing in Mexico. Tesla is another company that is looking at investing and producing its electrical vehicles there. For the ILO, we do recommend the creation of formal employment with better wages, with a focus on women and youth to combat also the root causes of labor migration. If people have jobs where they live, because migration is difficult to do, that will encourage people to stay where they are so they can find what we consider decent work. Decent work is freely chosen work with a good and a fair remuneration, with opportunities for advancement. This is the challenges I see in the younger cohort today. People are looking for jobs that will allow them to feel that the company respects them and gives them an opportunity to grow. I'll close up very quickly here. What we're seeing also is that there are gaps in what we call the decent work, and functioning sanitation are clear markers of inequality. So when you have this waste that's coming out and it's poisoning the atmosphere and the environment, and of course can shut down the beaches, and then that knock-on effect for hospitality, for tourists, it can actually take a lot of money out of the coffers of the government itself. Also, the e-waste and other types of pollutants are related to cancer and illnesses in toxic waters in local rivers, lung, pancreatic, and stomach cancer among the most common of people living near water sources and the maquiladoras as their dumping grounds. Health concerns for agricultural workers because of their direct contact with the wastewater, and other natural hazards that people are having. Once the floods will come, and then all of that elements that have been sitting in the soil will then come into your possibly into the groundwater, and then creating further ecological disasters. Recent UN estimates show that nearly 1 million people, the vast majority of them young children, die every year due to water-related diarrheal diseases. This is a massive health problem that we see around the world. And just to close out, that what we see is a bit of a labor trap. In the United States alone, 30 to 50% of water utility workforce will reach retirement age by 2020. I was recently up in Burlington, Vermont, and the people at the waste reclamation plant there were telling me that they can't find anybody to take over the jobs as they start to retire. So really ensuring that you have the right workforce for that is really quite important. Other concerns for the ILO are, the lax regulation due to several factors, along with the cheap cost of labor, and the weak labor rules, unfortunately, will create a downward spiral, or as we call it, a race to the bottom. So in concluding, just to say that the ILO, as you can imagine, is looking to have better conditions of work and more environmentally friendly productivity. And social dialogue is the process of workers and employers sitting at the table, negotiating these issues instead of being adversaries. It's important to create that dialogue, and that's where the ILO excels. Sources of finance and capital expenditure for conventional sanitation and wastewater management and public spending is very important. The fact that you have money available to upgrade these services is fantastic. Many parts of the world don't have that. But again, breaking ground and building those new facilities is really quite important. Maybe just to give you an example of the importance of the kind of the residual of wastewater, that wastewater and human excreta, that from a city of about 12 million people, the wastewater contains enough recoverable plant nutrients and fertilizer for about 500,000 hectares of farmland, which can in turn produce about 1.5 million tons of crops. So wastewater actually can be an important resource, and it should be seen as such, and not as something to mix with dirt and soil and put into landfills, and unfortunately make those lands unusable for the industry. So thank you very much. I'll stop there.
Thank you again to both of our speakers on our first panel. That was enlightening and in-depth look at how water, sewage, and pollution affects our lives and our economies. Our next panel, we have 5 speakers. They're going to have 10 minutes each to speak, and they're going to address the key question of why are we here and why is it important? Our first speaker will be Serge Dedina. Serge is the Executive Director of Wild Coast, an NGO that conserves coastal and marine ecosystems and addresses climate change through national solutions. He's got a long history of being at the front lines of cross-border sewage, first as a citizen of Imperial Beach and an avid surfer, most recently as the mayor of Imperial Beach, where he had a chance to sit on the Sandag board and actually chair Sandag board for a period of time. We got an inside look at the makings of the politics of border issues. So let's have a warm welcome for Serge Dedina.
Thanks, everybody. Good morning. We have slides. Just show pretty pictures. First, I want to thank Kevin and Richard. Well, first, for everybody hosting the panel, but for putting the context in clear. We are going to get the slides, right?
The slides are behind you. This screen we're trying to figure out.
Is there okay. Good. So, pretty picture. I think Kevin and Richard gave a great sort of discussion that, the reality for over 100 years, economic considerations and the interests of, capital have superseded the interests of the everyday people of the border region to have access to clean air, clean water, and clean beaches. And that continues. It's clear that the value of this binational economic output has not included the real cost of doing business. And that's to make sure that in most countries in the world, that when you have a factory, you actually have to get the sewage treated and the toxic resources not discharged into a natural water body that then goes into an ocean or a neighborhood and makes kids sick on both sides of the border. And it's clear that if we want to fix this problem, and I can go on and talk about all the problems, right? That it's the people in this room that are once again going to have to push our slow, extremely earthworms-like moving governments to get moving a lot more quickly to address this crisis. And that's why Scott Peters, our esteemed congressman, is working to change the regulatory system so we can actually build, technology and energy efficiency systems without having the same regulatory framework that you would use to stop, a mine that's going to destroy 10,000 acres. And why is it the governor recently said, I completely support efforts to retweak CEQA so that, we don't use CEQA as a way to stop affordable housing in Berkeley or to stop any other type of project that's going to make the environment better. So we're at a real crossroads. I show these pretty photos because Wild Coast works. I guess another photos are working, but anyway, okay, so we'll just start. Anyway, we work to preserve our coast and ocean resources and address climate change and natural solutions. So let me make it clear. We tend to forget that the US-Mexico border and our resources off our coast are among the most important in the world. We have an ocean wildlife superhighway off our coast with over 100,000 acres of binational protected areas that are designed to protect blue whales, white sharks, killer whales, least terns, clapper rails, hammerhead sharks. In the summer, we're going to come up with El Nino water warming, lobster grounds, commercial fisheries grounds, some of the most important in our hemisphere, right? Including islands, the Coronado Islands, that have a population of seabirds, the Xanthus murrelet, that exists nowhere else on Earth. In addition to recreational beaches, four city beaches, Rosarito, Tijuana, Coronado, Imperial Beach, 2 state beaches, Silver Strand and Porterfield State Park, a National Estuarine Research Reserve, the most important special forces training facilities in the world, where we spent $1 billion on a new base to allow the most advanced special forces teams in the world, because they come from all over the world, not just our own country, to train to defeat the bad guys. They're trying to undermine our quality of life. I've been to those facilities. They can't go in the water, they're getting sick. All right. So what we've said is that the interests of the biggest companies in the world supersede that of our Navy SEALs, that of 4 cities, including the city of San Diego, because kids are getting sick from the sewage in the air, the whales, the dolphins, and all the other natural resources that we've decided as nations to try to protect. All right, so that's important. But there are solutions. So that's a critical thing. We can talk about the history all we want, but the fact is, here are the solutions we're going to talk about. Water reuse. We need to unleash the power of the private sector, public-private partnerships quickly to address the crisis in Tijuana, which is there is no water in Tijuana. Anyone who lives in Tijuana knows that essentially it's running out of water. There's water restrictions that goes on in Ensenada as well. There's been a call for desal without addressing the need for water reuse. But the clincher here is that the restrictions on Colorado River water use have already promulgated the International Boundary Water Commission, the Bureau of Reclamation, to work, read about this in the paper, heroic work to work with the government of Mexico, who's already agreed to cuts in Colorado River allocations and the need to look at water reuse in Mexico. That's what's going to drive this discussion. Let me put it at what's at stake in the climate water reuse nexus. Mexico is fueled by heavy fuel oil, the most climate destructive type of energy system you can have. So burning heavy fuel oil in Tijuana and Mexicali Valley, producing some of the worst air quality and air quality impacts to kids anywhere in the world. You find more kids sick from asthma in the Mexicali Valley and Calexico than anywhere, that combined with the Salton Sea, right? We're burning heavy fuel oil to pump water from the Colorado River, which almost doesn't exist, into Tijuana and the cities where it's used inefficiently, turned into poop, and then discharged into the ocean. Crazy, and there's nobody running out of water. So fixing that system and unleashing the power of the private sector and the US government and Mexican government to work collaboratively, quickly on water reuse is what's going to resolve this problem. Number two, we have not addressed the real climate impacts of that system, right? And because the US and Mexico committed to the Paris Climate Treaty, and I want to acknowledge the role of our US State Department, and especially Ambassador Ken Salazar and President Biden in really pushing Mexico on the climate front. I'll say it, I'll probably get punished for it. The AMLO administration is the worst administration on the environment in the history of modern Mexico. It's unbelievable to see a modern Mexican president pushing coal versus actually pushing Mexico's long-standing commitment to addressing climate change. I'm on the front lines of that, so I can tell you it's worse than you could possibly imagine, which is a shame because Mexico's long been a leader on environmental conservation. So those are all related. Things that have not been addressed, methane. No one's done an accounting of what the impact of all the methane that's being stored into these systems, or how much methane is being addressed. So all those things are really important. And then finally, I want to point out to my colleagues, Faye Crabtree and Rosario Norzagaray. Rosario and Faye, raise your hands. So Faye and Rosario said, we're sick of people taking a lot of time to fix these problems. So they won an international grant from Mark Benioff at Salesforce. You know, Mark, he funded the UC Santa Barbara Benioff Institute Ocean Laboratory. It's called now, a global competition. And the winners were in Africa, Panama, Asia, and US-Mexico border to build trash booms. Right, during the pandemic, Faye and Rosario worked, got permits to build a trash boom in Los Laureles. It's picked up hundreds of thousands of pounds of trash, and they put the poorest people in Tijuana to work to doing that. People with good jobs who take pride in working in their neighborhood to actually solve a problem. We actually got NOAA to put in $100,000, and now, thanks to the success of that project, we had Ambassador Salazar there last year. Rosario and Faye got another grant from the San Diego Foundation for the new binational initiative, also funded by ICF and the Walton family, to build another one in Camino Verde, right? So at 100th the cost of what it would cost the government, does that mean that we need to just unleash the private sector and the entrepreneurial power of the community and NGOs to solve this problem? Absolutely not. If we only think of solutions that cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and not doing all of the above strategy, we're not going to fix this. But for the folks in this room, and I've seen Malin convene some of the most powerful leaders in the economic sector in San Diego, Tijuana, said, you guys need to work on this. That was about 5 or 6 years ago. Thank you, Malin. We need to do the same thing on water reuse and push the United States government and the Mexican government to work a lot quicker to get these contracts and projects built so people can start making money off reusing water. And then more importantly, there's a whole sector of the Mexican of economic leaders that have no access to water right now. They're calling me saying, when are we going to get this water reuse? Because I can't grow more crops in Tijuana or in a factory if I don't have access to water. So as I tell lots of officials, you're going to get the gold medal for solving these problems, but we need to do a lot more quickly. And I want to do it and acknowledge the role of Morgan and Doug and at the IBWC. They've done a tremendous job of putting together a really comprehensive plan against all odds. They just know that I'm really impatient and I want it to come tomorrow. But there's been a wholesale transformation in the role the United States government has played in this. It was due to our lawsuit, but also the goodwill, and because people around the table want to do the right thing. It's not enough. And the reality is, we're going to have to, in this IDFC, is the politics. It's really easy to say you're an environmentalist when you're on Twitter and you're in a meeting. To solve this issue, you have to make people uncomfortable. You have to make people be willing to get in a room and have some uncomfortable conversations with really powerful people who are more comfortable with beaches for 12 miles in San Diego being closed than actually working a little harder to solve the problem. And making some really powerful people who are in factories uncomfortable by saying you're going to have to fix this issue. So anyway, that's it. We can't fix this problem. We will fix this problem. but you're gonna hear me pushing you guys a lot harder and to be a lot quicker and smarter about how to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Serge. I think you should eat more Wheaties so you have a little more passion about this subject. It's my pleasure now to introduce Margarita Diaz to you. Margarita spent the last 30 years fighting to protect the natural environment from her position south of the border. We talk a lot about our beaches in San Diego, Imperial Beach, but Tijuana is a beach community as well. And she's initiated award-winning beach cleanup series in Tijuana and has worked with the Baja California initiative to improve information transparency between citizens and the government, which is critical in this issue. She's the executive director of the Proyecto Fronterizo de Educación Ambiental, or in English, the Border Project for Environmental Education, and has won a number of awards on both sides of the border for her coastal work. And reflecting on what Serge just said, Margarita told us before the meeting started that she's been out of water for 3 days at her house in Tijuana. Margarita will discuss the environmental impact of sewage on the Tijuana community and mitigation strategies. So welcome, Margarita Diaz. Pleasure.
A little shorter. I'm very, very happy to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation, for the opportunity to be here, for being representative from Mexico, and to talk about the things that we have been working in and the way we think we can address all these huge and important problems that we encounter. The speakers before me, they made the whole, they expressed and they explained the whole problems that we are encountering. And I want to start with a quote that is not from the border, but it's a quote from a survivor from the Dust Bowl. That is the worst man-made ecology disaster in American history. And I want to read just one part. He said, "We didn't try something different. We just tried harder, but doing the same thing that didn't work the last time." So I feel like that. I feel like we're working real hard for doing the same thing and having the same issues. So I wanna look at the problem, not just look at the water and the sewage that is running all over, but to see what's causing, what's the reason and what's the cause of what we are having and the problems we are encountering as a binational region. And our really challenges are our difference. And we have difference, and we have a good explanation right now about all the economy and all the numbers that we just heard and all the things and the difference in our economies. We're talking about the first economy that is the United States, the 15th economy that is Mexico. We have different history. And we sometimes don't see the history like with very common and everyday things. Our history has taken us to have a different metric systems, and that's a problem. That's a huge problem. We have different culture. We have different political systems. In Mexico, the water is managed centralized. Everything has to go to Mexico City, the decisions. In the United States, it's a little more decentralized. We have a gap of we have a different language. For me, it was going to be easier if I could speak Spanish and I can explain these important and difficult issues, but I'm speaking in English, so it's a barrier. It's a barrier to cross the border. It took me more time than I thought to be here to cross the border. And so we have this difference. We have this difference that we have to take into account, we have to see, and we have to work with it. Because this, and we say one thing, one expression in Mexico, viva la diferencia, because if we have diversity, we have enrichment. So if we are more diverse, we have more ideas, we have more points of view, so it will be better. So it's an asset. So we have to acknowledge, we have to recognize it, but we have to work with it. And also talking about economy, also we have this deep economy inequity. Tijuana is an important maquiladora. We just heard all the numbers, all the economy, all the labor. But why we have the maquiladora in Mexico? Because we have a different economies. Because it's cheap labor in Mexico, and we're taking the weight of waste, of labor contamination, and all the migration. Also, it's the highest growth rate in Mexico from the States and other countries. Why? Because they want to come here. And they stay in Tijuana. And in the graphic that Richard just showed, how the growth has gone up, it's like all the planning that you can do and all the people that are coming is difficult. Like it's not an easy issue. It's not something that is only environment. We have this really, really tough time because we are neighbors with you guys. And we have the increased pollution since the NAFTA was signed. And we have weak regulations. We have good laws, but the regulations are not very strong. So we have to work on that. So we have this complexity about the things. And I want to show little graphics here. We have this, and I got it from OECD, and water treatment. And you can see the blue one is the United States, the red one is Mexico. And then you can see, wow, Mexico is going fast and it's going high. You have 87% in US, 67% in Mexico. We're close, we're 20%. But there's another data that is not there. That is 50% of the treatment plants in Mexico are not working. So we're talking about 33%. So when you're talking to Tijuana, like, why don't you increase your treatment plant? Why are you doing that? We're talking about 33% in the country. And you're asking for one city to go up. So we have challenges. Also, we have this difference, like how much water is used in the United States. We don't use the same amount of water. It's 511 cubic meters, and we use 242 cubic meters. We use less water. So when we're talking about scarcity, when we're talking about reusing, we have to talk about use. And also, we're talking about national income. Like they were saying, like, why don't they remain in Mexico? Why don't they stay in Mexico and get good jobs? This is the income per capita. The blue one is in the United States. The red one is in Mexico. It's not the same thing to stay in Mexico than to stay in the US. We have a difference. And it's correlated with the waste. The blue one is the United States. The red one is Mexico. How much waste are we are, and how much the waste is going to Mexico from the United States. And we have to deal with it. So we have different issues that we have to take into account. And we have to talk about it. And I wanna go to that part. And what we're talking about, they just said, the problems that we are encountering: scarcity, pollution, public world, and challenge. But the greatest crisis is governance crisis. Because we want to solve the problem with the government. And we have to talk to something bigger, that is the governance. It's not the government. And I like this, it's also from OECD, and it's in multi-level governance. But we have to start off. Mind the gaps, bridge the gaps. Which are the gaps? We have to see the gaps. Accountability gaps, financing gaps. We're talking about, right now we have a lot of that. We are working on the financing gap. That's fine, we're happy. We're very happy about all the money that is coming and all the infrastructure is gonna build. But we're talking about financial. Are we talking about capacity? Does the water authority in Mexico have the capacity to build, to work, to maintain, to the technical labor, all the things that we need to have in Mexico? The information, are we sharing the information, or we have a gap of information? The goals, are we clear about the goals, shared goals, or we are just looking at from my perspective, what do I need? And the policy gap. What is this multi-level governance framework says? Let's do the diagnosing gaps, like from top to bottom, and then the overcoming this gap from bottom to top. Like this, let's work both sides. Like they say, from every side. And also, how we can deal with governance is not just, okay, let's sit at the table and let's talk. We have to have a frame, we have to have principles. And these are principles from the UN and from OECD. And we have to have principles, we have to know them, we have to study them, we have to incorporate it in our daily lives. We have to be taking into account every time we sit at the table. That is transparency, that is efficiency, accountability, it's resilience, participation, and we are having this space of participation, of fair participation, sustainability, integrated approaches, and equality. And I'm not going to go into those because we can stay here forever. And now we can stop. If you can move a little bit, thank you. And then I want to show, like, we have in this region, we have a lot of resources. Like it's not everything is lost. We have things that we can take and things that we have built, and they have spoke about those things, that we have international legal framework, we have cooperation across border, we have history here, we have huge and strong research institutions. Yesterday I was in a meeting with all these institutions. They were the PIs, the investigators, the top one. I was amazed about the information, the technology, and the knowledge is there. That when I'm sitting in the table with decision makers, I say like, they should know this, what they're talking about. We have public participation. In some places it's strong, in some places we need to increase. We have some samples that we have as an NGO, as Proyecto Fronterizo has participated. We have the Consejo de Administración Los Laureles. It's a big framework, and it's all designed and it's legal and it's publicized. We made this Mesa Técnica de Arroyo la Mar. We were sitting at the table with the government, with the private sector, and we got to sign with the governor an agreement that it was not going to be paid to Arroyo la Mar. It took us 5 years. It was a lot of work, but we were sitting and we were talking about numbers, about people, our social issues, economy issues, environmental issues. We have this Consejo de Participación de los Sauces. This is a protected area that is connected to the estuary. And we have a consejo. I'm the president of this consejo, of this board. And we're sitting, government, private sector, academic, and social sector in this. And we just set up a table, a technical table with the Water Authority, SES, with the NGO. And this is the first time we're sitting at the table and we're talking. And the NGO didn't come complaining. We didn't go complaining or asking. We have proposals and we have money that we have got from foundations. So it's like, they're like, I don't know what you're doing here. And we are all women in the NGO. So it's actually like, why are you guys here? Where all these women came up from? And this is my proposal. This is the way that I think that we can operate, that we can work this governance with the things that are already set out, the things that are already functioning, the things that are already in our laws. And I'm gonna start from bottom up. We have two entities that, one is the Tijuana River Valley Recovery Team, led by David. Thank you. And I have been invited for many years to be part of this group, so I know a little bit about how it works. It was founded in 2009. And also it's the Comité de Playas Limpias that is in the Mexican side, and it was founded in 2004. What I'm trying to do here, we have a middle line and we have like a mirror structure. So what's the counterpart of the Tijuana River Valley Recovery? Comité de Playas Limpias. And why I say that? Because the Tijuana River Valley Recovery Team, it has in their members, they have officials from the three levels. They have private sector, they have academy, they have social sector. They're working, they have projects, they have a strategic planning, and they have a road. And they're talking about the US issues. In the side of Mexico, we have the Comité de Playas Limpias, and it's sitting the three levels of government, private sector, the academy and the social sector. And we're sitting, we have a strategy, strategic planning, and now we're working to generate these projects. And it's for the Mexicans. How these two groups are lead in the US side is the water board, that is a state official, and it's like legal and everything is formal and great job that they does. In the Mexican side is a Consejo de Cuenca. The Consejo de Cuenca is an entity that is regulating two states, Baja California Norte and South. So we have a state entities, government entities that come from they have all the legal framework. They're legally established. So all the decisions that are taken in these two groups are I don't know how to say it in English, vinculatorio, that it has everything that is said, that the decisions, it goes up and it has to be done. And then it comes to the federal, Comisión Nacional del Agua, this is the Water Authority in Mexico, and EPA. So you have the federals. And also you have the federals, and we have here Tali, the EBWC, SILA, and the commissioners. And we have another entity, and we have another instrument that's already, again, an official, and it took many years to sign the Minute Tree Treaty in 2015. And the proposal is like to have this, and the minute 3 training, what it says is it has to have some working groups from 3 subjects, water, sediment, and trash. And then these groups, sometimes in the practical time that we have been working, you have a water group. And then the water group has to have a meeting in Mexico, because we have to decide what you're going to say in the binational meeting. So you have a meeting in Mexico, you have a meeting in the US. Then you go to your meeting of water. Then the water has to go to the minute 320. Then the minute 320 has to go to the board, and then it goes to the commissioners. So it's a lot of meetings, really, it's a lot of meetings. We don't have time. as Serge was saying, yeah, it takes so long because we have so many meetings, and we're the same people. We see each other, and we cards, and we see one meeting, and then we see another meeting, and we are in the same meeting. So it's like to take those meetings, to don't do these working groups, to use Comité de Playas Limpias, to use the Tijuana River that is linked, that is legal, that is there, that is set up, and then these 2 hours that we have is like in the minute 3 training. In that scenario, we take decisions. We bring the subjects. We put the things like we work the proposal, the questions, the things that we want to manage, because we have to decide who's going to do it, how is going to do it, when is going to do it, with whom is going to do it, how is going to be linked. And those decisions are taken there, because as you can see in the border there, that my line is there, we have the minute and the EBWC, they have 2 foot, like they're right in the middle of in both sides. And the green area, because it doesn't have a name, because it's just an idea, is to create a space. It can be virtual, it can be real, it can be in a university, it can be in some place, somehow, to put the information there. Because for the decision makers, they have to have the information by day. Things, and Richard said it very clear. We have a very dynamic border. Everything is changing, everything is moving. So we have to have information. David has asked also, I have been in many meetings. I said, like, what's the project in Mexico? What Mexico is doing? How is everything is going? What's the numbers, the things, the projects, the activities, the situations, the questions, the necessities, to put it there. So everybody puts the information there, and you can have it. If the people from the minute to 320 needs information, they can grab it. If the recovery team needs information from Mexico, they can go and grab it there. It can be like one of these orange dots can be the academy. So the academy that is involved in these tables, they can like get the information, systemize the information, put it there, and work it like more useful, user-friendly way of dealing with information. So this is what I think we have to work. We have to change how we are dealing with the problems, and for that we have to have political will. We have to have, and as you said, respect our ideas and work together. And the last thing, and you know this phrase from Einstein, that we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. We have to change, and we have to change from the bottom up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Margarita. If you ever need to convince anybody that there is good thinking on the other side of the border, call Margarita. She'll convince them. Good job. Next person up is David Gibson. David's been a biologist with 34 years of experience in water, stormwater, and wastewater programs, and as the executive officer of the San Diego Regional Water Quality Control Board, he carries a big stick in regulatory matters. But my experience with David is he knows how to balance that regulatory mechanisms with innovative strategies that can address water quality issues in an innovative way. You know, his works included biological assessments of Southern California rivers and streams, founding and leading the San Diego Stream Team, and cleaning up contaminated sediments in San Diego Bay. He will discuss water quality issues, enforcement issues, and preferred alternatives to address our cross-border sewage issues. So please welcome David.
I know that we're running late, so I only have about 30 or 40 slides. Do we have my slides? Do we have the not pretty pictures slide?
Yeah, you have this. things in the,
Oh, this thing. That's not the right one. All right, I'll leave that for right now. Hopefully the pretty pictures, not so pretty pictures are in there somewhere. Anyway, I'm going to depart a little bit from what Carl said I'm going to talk about because the depressing litany of what's on those slides, we already know and understand. I'm going to take us back a few steps. In the early 1990s, I was charged with doing a biological assessment of the Santa Margarita River. And the EPA protocol that the state gave me to do was to find a pristine river to compare the Santa Margarita to. And I explored California from San Luis Obispo to Imperial Beach, and I could not find such a river. Santa Margarita was being used as a reference condition in the Santa Ana region, for example. And so along the way, I thought, well, how about I compare the Santa Margarita River to the anti-reference condition, the worst river I know in the region. And the Tijuana River qualified during a 6-year drought when the Ventura River, for example, was empty and dry. Tijuana River was 365 days a year of raw sewage, about 20 million gallons per day, give or take. The boots were not tall enough, the gloves were not long enough, and my sampling of the river was a full body baptism in the Tijuana River. Which when I say today that my job nowadays is to live, breathe, and drink the Tijuana River, I'm not quite exaggerating. Unfortunately, that's somewhat true. And unfortunately, also 30 years later, we're still talking about many of these same types of issues. And what I want to assert is that that is a dilemma that we face in two countries with asymmetrical needs and resources and relationships. And it is not the vision of the future that I believe that we can have. As the earlier speakers have already well articulated, San Diego and Tijuana, Baja and California, the US and Mexico are closely tied together in many ways. But we are also brought together now by the urgency of the crisis in the water quality issues in the Tijuana River. From a regulatory standpoint, the river, the estuary, the coastal waters, and the beaches are listed as impaired on the Clean Water Act Section 303D list for over 55 water body constituent combinations. Beaches are closed between Borderfield State Park and the Hotel del Coronado, frequently due to elevated bacterial levels, indicating the risk of exposure to pathogens, including norovirus, adenovirus, and bacteria like Streptococcus and Vibrio. In particular, Borderfield State Park, according to the data that I have, that's from that sampling, has been closed now for bacterial indicators for 475 consecutive days. These impacts and the attempts to address them are not recent. Carl stole one of my talking points already today, and I'll remind you again that in San Diego in 1953, when the Water Board was asking the federal government for assistance on the transboundary sewage flows, the Water Board was also focused on sewage flows in the region, in particular in San Diego Bay. San Diego Bay could properly be described then, as one of my predecessors did, as a metropolitan cesspool. Besides discharges of treated and untreated wastewater, industrial discharges from shipyards, boatyards, canneries, a rendering plant, all rendered San Diego, and had areas labeled as experiencing lethal effects of pollution. That was San Diego Bay, and that was in the 1950s and 60s. The solution to that is the solution that we have now in front of us, which is a regional wastewater treatment plant and a regionally managed collection system. With the construction of the Point Loma treatment plant in 1963, San Diego Bay began to recover rapidly, including those areas of lethal effects. That is the approach that we need to move forward now in the Tijuana watershed. We started it in the 1990s with essentially a quasi-regional treatment plant at the South Bay International Wastewater Treatment Plant. And we had other treatment plants and collection systems. But now we have the opportunity to fundamentally realign it. So the vision of the future that I want to talk about, rather than the 5 TMDLs that we would have to adopt that cost $2 million a piece and would cost hundreds of millions of dollars to implement in two countries with asymmetrical needs and resources, I want to talk about what we have the opportunity going forward that Sally Spener will provide more details on, which is the funding that's been provided by the USMCA Act in the United States and by the agreement between the United States and Mexico in Minute 328 and in the Statement of Intent. The funding that's been provided would have us expand the wastewater treatment plant from 25 million gallons per day to 50 million gallons per day. and would realign the collection system so that most of the sewage in Tijuana goes to that treatment plant. The other two treatment plants operating in Tijuana will continue to do what they do, and the discharges from the San Antonio de los Buenos plant, which you can see up there on the right on the top slide, would be treated as secondary and would be serving primarily the coastal area of Tijuana. This, in fact, anticipates what the previous projects did not, the future growth needs of our communities in Tijuana and in San Diego. It also allows us to envision and prepare for and have an adaptation plan for climate change and resiliency. We are facing a double whammy in terms of climate change. We have hotter, drier climate and the interruption of the reliability of imported water supplies in Tijuana as well as in San Diego. And we also have those wild and crazy atmospheric river events. So we get the worst of both worlds when it comes to that. The full range of projects studied by the US EPA in its programmatic environmental impact statement is the long-term solution to over 70 years of transboundary water pollution and to climate change resiliency that we're going to need for the next 70 years in Southern California. As I mentioned, Sally Spener will describe the key components of that, but what I want to highlight for your attention is that the 50 million gallon per day international treatment plant with on-site anaerobic digestion of solids and the ability to handle peak flows, double the daily volume, and maintain secondary treatment standards for the wastewater, but primary treatment standards for river diversion, is the way to ensure that we have protection for human and environmental health in the discharges from the South Bay Ocean outfall. I'd like to emphasize something I think we all intuitively understand, which is that such generational achievements are neither cheap nor easy to accomplish. As Margarita's already pointed to, the difficulties and the challenges that we have working across an international border in a shared watershed are significant. The funding right now, however, is not enough. As much money has been put forward, it is only a half measure. And unless we are able to advance a program in both countries that supports the full implementation of the US EPA preferred alternative, we will have a halfway measure mark like we had before that takes care of what we needed 10 years ago. It does not envision the needs for the next 10, 20, and 30 years, both in terms of waste management for sewage and trash, but also for water supply resiliency between our shared communities. My closing thoughts on this is that the TMDLs and the enforcement actions, which I think that was asked to talk about, have gotten us where we need to be. And that is that to go back to what we originally envisioned in the 2009 recovery team and recovery strategy, which is that partnership with Mexico and a collaborative approach with investments on both sides for the long term is where we need to go. We've made several efforts on this already that are underway. Minute 320, a framework to address sediment, trash, and water quality in both countries, is proceeding forward. And I'm happy to say that the Water Board has achieved funding to help support that through a watershed improvement plan. We may have a better title for it eventually, but that's what I had to call it for bureaucratic purposes. I will be providing that funding to the service of the Commissioner to provide that report, which will generate projects in both countries for mutual benefit and do a feasibility scoping analysis of those projects. Minute 328 and the US-Mexico Statement of Intent are groundbreaking generational moments for us. We should not lose sight of that, but they are down payments on what we need to accomplish. And I would propose an MOU between the Water Board and the federal agencies to guide us forward on the permitting challenges for all of this, but also on the TMDL alternatives approach that will achieve the outcomes we need from that USMCA Mexico approach without the unnecessary regulatory oversight and burden, but actually set targets we can achieve and should achieve. The important message for you today is that the US and Mexico, Baja and California, San Diego and Tijuana have the right formula for a generational restoration and protection of water quality and for climate change resiliency. But success will only come if we see it through in support for the fullest implementation of all of the projects identified in the preferred alternative of the programmatic environmental impact statement. And you can find that all on the website. It's very fascinating reading, but that's where we need to go. So with that, see, other people can get it to go and I can't. Those are the unpretty pictures of what we have to deal with, what challenges we're facing. This is a picture of what, unfortunately, right now we're seeing in the IBWC plant, which are significant costs that are taking off the top of the USMCA funding, something we need to acknowledge and address as we go forward. But there is a measure of success. That's an active working secondary treatment plant. That's technology that's proven and works, and that technology is what we need in the final upgraded plant. And so with that, I thank you again very much.
Thank you, David. When it comes to the end of the pipeline, short of the ocean, it's Imperial Beach. And Chris Helmer is the Environmental and Natural Resources Director for that city, where he's at the forefront of addressing the impacts of cross-border sewage in the city. He regularly collaborates with local leaders, stakeholders, researchers, and others on cross-border and sustainability issues. He's a regional leader on stormwater programs and coastal management issues. Chris is going to discuss the environmental impact of cross-border pollution on the Imperial Beach community and mitigation strategies. So please welcome Chris.
Well, I want to say thanks for having me here, and really, we have all the leaders here that are the environmental leaders on the Tijuana River, the regulatory leaders, the federal leaders, the binational leaders, and we have the solutions, and we kind of went over kind of the solutions of the comprehensive preferred alternative from the EPA, and really that all started from an effort that started the Tijuana River recovery team, and I remember Carl Nettleton from 2008 to 2009 when I was like a newbie coming here in Tijuana River, and they started their recovery team, and essentially what ended up in what's called the recovery vision is essentially what became recommended from all these efforts nearly 15 years later. What I can say with all these leaders, we're still not doing enough. We have failed at really, I mean, starting 10 years, I thought it would be a lot farther along. Really. I went to Imperial Beach because I was a surfer. I'm like, oh, I get to go work at the beach. This would be really great. I'm going to kind of talk about the perspective of being local at the end of the pipe of the River. It was a challenge that I studied when I was in graduate school, but at the end of the day, you're talking about a wastewater treatment plant. That's a 1960s technology. That's not that difficult. That's at the bottom of the hill, the end of the pipe, where theoretically, you should be able to capture and treat this stuff and clean up this problem. But over, the 15 years been there, we've certainly made progress, but we're really not that much closer. We're certainly not any cleaner than it was 15 years ago, and it's really tragic to see that our beaches have been closed nearly since Thanksgiving 2021 on the south end of our beach. And believe me, that has an impact of our residents in Imperial Beach. They get this pent-up frustration that often overflows at the IBWC public meetings, and you get some really angry residents that rightfully feel that they have not been listened to for decades and decades and decades. And that's really been the frustration of our residents, and why we really want to see these efforts succeed. We're all talking, identifying the solutions that actually need to happen. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to residents, before last week, I was talking to a resident on our beach, and he came to me and he said, I am embarrassed to take my family who comes to visit me in Imperial Beach to the beach because I don't want to have to explain to them why they cannot go in the water. And if you go to the beaches, I'm not got these bright yellow signs that say contaminated, don't go in the water. I hear this again and again from our residents. I hear it again and again from the NGOs who are really trying to fight and stop these things. And I tell them, oh, there's a solution. We're all working together. There's a down payment. The federal government's doing, has put money aside in the USMCA, but none of this is enough. The USMCA is a half-assed solution. Again, $300 million is a down payment. That's going to get us going, and we haven't hardly spent anything from doing infrastructure around yet. And you got to go through environmental reviews, and you got to do the engineering and design, and there's this process. But the beaches are still closed. They've been closed, and this summer we're not looking to open up. We're actually canceling our junior lifeguard program in our summer. We've never canceled our junior lifeguard program. We're canceling our junior lifeguard, the most successful recreation program we have in our city. So I'm not trying to be a downer on any of this, but what I really have learned over the last couple of years is leadership matters. The last 8 years when Serge was mayor, leadership matters, and someone has to put their political skin, someone has to put their the regulatory job on the line, because what we're doing and what we have been doing traditionally clearly has not worked. We have built much stronger partnerships than we've ever had before, and it's been my job to, you know, kind of participate in this for little IB, where IB is 2 miles by 2 miles of urban area. We're not a very big city at all, so we rely heavily on our partners. So we approach all of our partners, including, you know, the researchers who really help us understand when the water is polluted, why it is polluted, with our regulatory partners to help come up with solutions, and with the elected leaders that actually want to engage in this issue. And this is one that needs to be solved. This is one that is fundamental to the success. If you want to have successful trade along the border, and you want to have high quality employees who want to be attracted to live in Tijuana, well, you want to have a nice environment from the beginning. Believe me, the beaches in Tijuana are even more polluted than they are here in Imperial Beach. And our beaches are pretty bad as well. It's an economic opportunity for this region that has been neglected, and it's being felt on both sides of the border, and it's affecting the culture and the communities and the economic growth of our city. I'm still optimistic. Even though I've been doing this for 15 years and I keep getting disappointed, and I'm naturally an optimistic person, I'm still optimistic that, you know, there's this vision of this greater future for San Diego region, and San Diego has been a leader. Pure water. You know, by 2035, 1/3 of all the water in San Diego is going to be recycled water. And that's happening now all over through Southern California, and now it's actually being talked about in Mexico. All the climate action plans and the carbon neutrality that we're expecting to have by 2035, the state of California is only going to be selling electric cars. That's infrastructure that doesn't exist yet. And we're still talking about how we're going to build a wastewater treatment plant within 10 years. And we're going to build a whole industry to provide electric vehicles to the rest of the state. Electrifying our interstate highways and the trade that's coming across the border. I mean, there's big visions for the state of California to electrify our whole transportation and disperse this through the rest of the nation, starting here in California. We're only still talking about a wastewater treatment plant that we want to build and a couple of trash booths that go on the other side of the border. It's not complicated, but I hope the takeaway from this is we're all leaders, and everyone needs to step up and do more. And this could be a huge win, because if you can actually control the trash, control the sewage, control the debris that's in the river valley, and not cause flooding that's potentially going to be happening because of, you know, a new border fence that's going across the Tijuana River, if you haven't looked into that, then this is a region of huge opportunity. When the river is not flowing and the pump station Sila is actually diverting from the river, it is amazing how quickly that Tijuana estuary cleans up. Within a full spring tide cycle, within 2 weeks, that estuary is cleaner and more ecologically productive than any other ones in Southern California. And that's just because it's a fully intact system that just shows how resilient nature is. And we just got to give, you know, the Tijuana River an opportunity to clean up itself. So I don't have a whole lot to add other than these are the experts. I'm honored to be a part of kind of working with everyone here. And I really hope that we can all learn that leadership matters, and all of us after this meeting are going to step up and do more of our part to make sure that, you know, all we're asking for is wastewater treatment plants and trash bins. It's not that difficult. So I hope we can do that.
Very good.
Thank you, Chris. I know we're running a little behind. We'll take a little bit shorter break, and we've got, fortunately, have almost an hour for Q&A, so we should be in good shape by the time we get back from the break. I'm delighted now to introduce Sally Spener. She's worked on border issues at IBWC for many years. She's a U.S. Section Secretary and Foreign Affairs Officer for IBWC. She provides foreign policy advice to the Commission and leads diplomatic matters with the Mexican section of the Commission. She was previously the Public Affairs Officer at IBWC, where I first got to know her. She's also been the Executive Director of Common Cause Florida, an award-winning broadcast journalist and news director for Tallahassee's NPR station. And I have to say that IBWC's role in border sewage issues can't be overstated. Its mission is to provide binational solutions regarding boundary demarcation, national ownership of waters, sanitation, water quality, and flood control in the border region. Sally's going to discuss IBWC Minute number 328, recent funding that we've talked about, and cross-border collaboration. So please give a warm welcome to Sally Spener.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. I wanted to start just by introducing a couple of key members of the federal team who are here today. Christine earlier mentioned Morgan Rogers, but I just want to give a shout out to him. He is our area operations manager at our South Bay International Wastewater Treatment Plant. He's doing a great job. He does a lot of community outreach, and we're really glad to have him as a part of the IBWC team. I also wanted to introduce Doug Lydon. He is an engineer with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and he has played an absolutely critical role in securing Mexico's participation in the solutions for the San Diego-Tijuana sanitation problem and ensuring that those solutions get implemented. He even spent about a year or so working out of the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City to secure those agreements. And so he is a great partner from EPA in the solution. So thank you guys both for coming today. So we've had a rough year. We had a lot of things happen over the last year that you see light at the end of the tunnel, and then something else happens and things get difficult. Last summer, contractors working on a highway project in Tijuana were doing some borings, and they bored a hole right through a wastewater pipeline right along the border there at Smuggler's Gulch and Matadero Canyon. The flow from that was so heavy that it actually undermined another pipeline that was next to it. We had 2 pipeline failures at that time. The good news is that we have 2 agency heads of the US and Mexican sections of the International Boundary and Water Commission, Adriana Resendez, who's been a longtime engineer in the Mexican section and worked her way up to the top role, and our US Commissioner, Dr. Maria Elena Giner, who was the longtime manager of the Border Environment Cooperation Commission, the partner agency of the North American Development Bank, and an expert in sanitation infrastructure, who are absolutely hands-on, committed, involved, and won't sit back to wait for somebody else to find a solution. They were actively involved. They went on site. We met in person with the head of CESP, which is the Tijuana utility, to make sure that those pipelines got fixed as soon as possible. And indeed, they mobilized crews quickly, and one of the lines was repaired in about 2 weeks. That basically stopped that uncontrolled flow of wastewater, but the other one is not yet repaired. And so as a result of that, the South Bay International Wastewater Treatment Plant that Morgan manages continues to take excess flows. And we are treating those flows, but it's creating a lot of operational issues and problems at the plant. But again, he's hands-on. We're doing what we can to try to prevent untreated flows from crossing the border. And our 2 commissioners of IBWC are making sure that we're getting cooperation from Mexican officials to implement those solutions. We also had a very wet winter. Stormwater flow in the Tijuana River is contaminated with wastewater. So whenever the river is flowing, the beaches are closed. We've had constant river flows since late December. And as many of you know, for the January through March period, San Diego's precipitation was more than 150% of the average. So after you've had a couple of dry years, to have a wet one like we've had this last winter, we really saw just constant transboundary flow in the river. So it's been a challenging year. Morgan's doing a great job of sharing information with the public about the conditions in the Tijuana River Valley, and the easiest way for you to follow that and keep track not only of the Tijuana River Valley conditions, but all of the good work we're doing at the IBWC is to follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @USIBWC, and I'll give that again at the end. So Dave Gibson mentioned a little bit about Minute 328. A minute is a binding agreement of the International Boundary and Water Commission intended to implement treaty. The title of it, Sanitation Infrastructure Projects in San Diego, California, Tijuana, Baja California, for immediate implementation and for future development. It entered into force in August of 2022. We had a wonderful entry into force ceremony at the Tijuana estuary. We have about $500 million in investment over the next 5 years, including $330 million from the United States and the rest from Mexico. With the projects that were identified in the minute, we estimate that that will result in a 50% reduction in the number of days of transboundary wastewater flow in the Tijuana River and an 80% reduction in the volume of wastewater discharged to the Pacific Ocean south of the border at San Antonio de los Buenos. That's where millions of gallons of untreated wastewater currently are discharged directly to the ocean. With these projects, the amount of Mexican sewage undergoing treatment in the region will increase by 45 million gallons per day. So that's going to reduce sewage both in the Tijuana River as well as the Pacific Ocean. So the projects, as was alluded to earlier, include doubling the capacity of our existing South Bay International Wastewater Treatment Plant, construction of a new treatment plant in Mexico at San Antonio de los Buenos. Other projects include rehabilitation and replacement of pipelines and pumping plants in Mexico. Minute 328 also indicates our government's intent to negotiate in good faith on a number of future projects, including diversion and treatment of the Tijuana River at an advanced primary level, installation of a trash boom, and improved collection and treatment of transboundary flows at the canyons. So as was noted earlier, not only do we have a river that flows and brings contaminated water into the United States, but a whole series of canyons. We're downhill, and so when you have issues in those canyons, that affects the conditions in the United States as well. So we are making progress in implementing these agreements, and I wanted to share some of the good news in that regard. In October of last year, the United States section of the International Boundary and Water Commission awarded a contract for the initial steps we need to undertake to double the size of the South Bay International Wastewater Treatment Plant. The contractor is required to determine the required upgrades and repairs to the existing plant. That part has been completed, and we found that about a fourth of the plant's assets, more or less, need replacement or rehabilitation. So as was discussed, the plant came online in the 1990s. The secondary component of it is more or less a decade old. So some of those older assets in particular are in need of some work, as would be expected. The contractor is going to recommend the best procurement method for design and construction. They're going to prepare design and construction cost estimates, as well as a detailed project scope of work for the plant expansion. And we expect to solicit bids for design of the plant expansion in the second half of 2023. So we are taking steps and moving forward with that part of the project. In November of 2022, we had another important milestone. And I just want to, again, another shout out to United States Environmental Protection Agency, which has been a leader in the USMCA process. USMCA, of course, refers to the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, the updated free trade agreement between our countries. It's the US implementing legislation for that treaty that authorized the funding for the San Diego-Tijuana solutions. The United States section has the experience with constructing and operating infrastructure, but EPA really brings the policy expertise and funding to the table. So our two agencies released the final, and again, this is in November of last year, the final programmatic environmental impact statement for the comprehensive infrastructure solution to mitigate transborder water pollution. We identified our preferred alternative, alternative 2, which includes expansion of the South Bay plant from 25 to 60 million gallons per day, new infrastructure to divert additional flows from the Tijuana River, construction of a new advanced primary treatment plant in San Diego to treat up to 60 million gallons per day of river flows, trash booms in the river to capture solid waste, rehabilitation of sewer pipelines in Tijuana, construction of that new plant in San Antonio de los Buenos, and effluent reuse in Mexico. According to the environmental impact statement, implementing alternative 2 would reduce the number of days of transboundary flow in the Tijuana River from an average of 153 to an estimated 36 per year, a 76% reduction. It would also eliminate raw sewage discharges into the Pacific Ocean at San Antonio de los Buenos, Mexico, and we expect to sign a record of decision soon. There is progress on implementation in Mexico. The San Antonio de los Buenos wastewater treatment plant is moving along. They have grant funding from FONADIN, Mexico's infrastructure fund, and the rest is going to be funded through a public-private partnership. We met with the state of Baja water officials a little over a month ago, and they assured us that the funding aspect for this has been resolved. The Mexican section of the International Boundary and Water Commission has emphasized to Mexico's National Water Commission, CONAGUA, the urgency of this project, and United States Commissioner Helmer and her Mexican counterpart are in Mexico City this week, meeting with the head of CONAGUA to reiterate that message. The San Antonio de los Buenos treatment plant could go out to bid as early as next month with construction plan for 2024 to 2026. The other good news is that the PBCLA pump station rehabilitation has been completed. I toured it about a month or so ago, and it looks great. So what's the function of PBCLA? When we don't have all these stormwater flows in the Tijuana River, PBCLA is the pump station that pumps it out of the river and basically prevents it from flowing with contamination into the United States. The Mexican section of the IBWC took that over more or less a year and a half ago. And during the dry season, we saw that it was really effective. It certainly suffered from neglect and lack of funding under the previous administration. Sometimes they just turn it off to save money on the electric bill. But that is running well. I think as we start to dry out, as we move into spring and summer, you're going to see effective removal of dry season transboundary flows from the Tijuana River. So that's good news. The Oriente Collector project, one of the wastewater pipelines in Mexico, is nearing completion. This will prevent the risk of a 7 million gallon per day sewage discharge. Likewise, construction of the rehabilitation of the international collector is expected to begin shortly, and that's a 60 million gallon per day pipeline. So this will help prevent a catastrophic collapse in this line that carries sewage to the South Bay International Wastewater Treatment Plant. And I really want to emphasize how important it is to have good pump stations and good pipelines in Mexico. It seems like when we've had in recent years anyway, most of the big problems, with the exception of that, somebody just punctured a hole in a wastewater pipeline. That was just an accidental thing, but the pipelines are just really old. The pump stations are really old and don't work well. And you want to have good, solid, rehabilitated pipelines that aren't going to be falling apart and leaking and causing you problems. So those pipeline projects are really important. And also, construction will start this year on pumping plant 1 to provide reliable conveyance of flows to San Antonio de los Buenos, and it'll also have some extra protection from flooding. Another important project is in design. It would divert the effluent of the La Morita and Arturo Herrera wastewater treatment plants out of the Tijuana River. So this has caused a lot of problems for us. That effluent is going into the river. So you have PBCLA that's trying to pump the water out of the river. So when you have this effluent going there and the pump station only has limited capacity, it's easily overwhelmed when you get the higher flows. So we're going to be removing with these projects a lot of that water that's going into the Tijuana River channel. PBCLA will be able to operate more efficiently. It's going to have a really positive effect on the transboundary flows. So I also just wanted to mention a little bit about Minute 320, which some of the other speakers spoke about. Again, focusing on U.S.-Mexico cooperation on the 3 key issues of solid waste, water quality, and sediment. And I think based on your suggestion, Margarita, we are going to be having fewer meetings and we're going to be combining some of those work groups. So I think we've heard you and other stakeholders on that point. We have recently reinvigorated this process. We struggled a little bit during the pandemic to try to keep this going. We had kind of a changeover during that time period in our secretariat. We have a new secretariat contracted and on board, and they have us back on track with regular meetings. They compiled a long list of projects proposed by various entities, and they're working to help refine the list and identify the means to implement the projects. And Dave talked a little bit about the regional boards and the state of California's role in that. But just some of the proposed projects that have been discussed at the meetings include water quality monitoring to establish a baseline to measure the impacts of the USMCA projects, projects to control points of discharge into the Tijuana River in Mexico, solid waste management at the source, as well as trash bins in the river, as well as comprehensive planning. That is of a lot of interest to our work group members. So that was an interesting thing that we've learned from those meetings. One of the successes of the Minute 320 process was a water quality monitoring study that we did. We published it in 2020. It was a comprehensive binational water quality study undertaken by the International Boundary and Water Commission, United States and Mexico. It analyzed 267 different parameters in water and 204 in sediment. Pathogens, metals, industrial organics, pesticides, conventional parameters found in wastewater. The good news is 131 were not detected at all, but we did detect 136, and there were a number of them that exceeded the standards that are applicable in both the United States and Mexico. And these are standards, what we found is stuff that's associated with wastewater. So it wasn't a surprise. We compared it to the influent data we had for our wastewater treatment plant, and it was pretty consistent with what was coming into the plant. Bacteria, ammonia, phosphorus, biochemical oxygen demand, oils and greases, metals associated with metals plating were present, including some in excess of applicable standards. Certain pesticides were either not detected or below limits in both countries' regulations. I think that was a little bit of a surprise. We thought we'd see more pesticide impacts. But one of the things that was of note was the organic compound DEHP, which exceeded the parameters. And this is something that we think likely leached from plastic trash in the canyons and in the river. And you've seen some photos here today of all the plastics. And so I think that really shows us that nexus between solid waste and water quality. So what is the takeaway message from today? The federal governments of the United States and Mexico are investing hundreds of millions of dollars. Progress is being made. And we've already seen the results of the PDCLA improvements in handling the dry weather flows. We've already seen greater responsiveness from Mexican authorities. And as more and more of the Minute 328 projects are brought online, we will continue to see things get better. Another thing that I would say is a very positive sign is stakeholder advocacy, stakeholder passion, like this gentleman to my left. With the advocacy to secure funding to get the job done. I'd like to encourage all of you to stay involved in this. The US IBWC has an outreach and community involvement program called our Citizens Forum program. And it is our public outreach board. It holds public meetings about IBWC activities and related projects. Our current board, they just finished their terms and we are opening it up to applications from the general public. If you're interested in applying, you can go to our website and look up Citizens Forums and you can find the application online or see me after this meeting and I'll give you more specifics on it. Applications are due on May the 5th. You can follow us on Twitter. Again, our Twitter handle is @USIBWC. We also have information about the Citizens Forum meetings. You can also find information on Twitter about the Citizens Forum application process. And also with EPA, we have public meetings that are held and we are expecting to have one around the second week of May. We should be finalizing that and announcing that shortly. That will be a virtual meeting. They're held periodically to update you on the USMCA projects. Anyway, I thank you very much for your kind attention and look forward to talking with you more as our morning progresses. Thank you.
You know, it's interesting as I sit here at this table, with the exception of Kevin Hero, I just met today, I've known and associated with everybody at this table for many years. And it seems to me that, and working with the border community on this and other issues has always been a delight. It seems to me that friends, relationships, and sharing of information in an important way are how we're going to get there. And so I encourage you all to continue those relationships, build them, and we will succeed. Finally, we will succeed. We're running a little bit late. Let's take a short 10-minute break, and then we'll convene back. Fortunately, we have almost an hour for Q&A, so we're still going to have a good time for Q&A session. We have Catherine has showing the little yellow cards there for questions that will be picked up. If you can write your questions down, that would be great. And, excuse me?
Can I make a housekeeping announcement when you're done?
Sure, yes, sure. And so if you fill those questions out, that would be great, and we will go through them and get through as many of them as we can. With that, Chad Carson has a quick.
Thank you, Carl. So when I went out, I noticed that the men's room is closed for maintenance. If it still is, there's just go up a level or down a level, and in this roughly the same spot on the floor, there's an available men's room. There's also a unisex single person one here.
So thank you all, and again, thank our panelists again for a great session, and we'll get back to Q&A.
Not too bad. Never built on it.
It's obvious to me.
Well,
Who doesn't know Megan, right? If you all go to this school, you'll know Megan.
Who's in charge?
Is it the Mexican federal government? Is that the program? So yesterday? And you're not in this room. Nice. Damn it.
You have to.
There's leadership, absolutely. You gotta have leadership up front. Damn.
Gloria, nice to see you. How are you doing?
Hey, Dad. God's in DC, so it means I get to go out and meet him. They have the chambers all out there this week. So. Very good to see you. Good. Trying to stay up to date as much as I can. That was great. Fascinating. Somebody's got to do it. That was a long time ago. Still exists. One covers the whole border, but because the impact is so regional, Scott's really so one on the immigration, migrants issues, and then Scott's more the vocal guy on the environmental stuff. Sarah, of course, supports all of us. Yep. Of course.
Who's in charge of the sewer problem?
Damn. Good idea.
That's what we're hearing today.
What I learned in my work over here, people have good ideas. Somebody that's the thing.
Who is in charge?
I've been working on something I'd love to sit down with you and it basically takes I'd love to share that with you.
Okay, well,
I will. I think there's some voice in somewhere. Up or down. Can I introduce myself? Peter Meister.
Convenza a la secada y que arriesgue algo, convenza a su amigo que arriesgue. Es un negocio.
You put out some wonderful
Pero para el suceso se puede generar. O sea, pongo que efectivamente ya tiene mucho trabajo hecho y andado, a mí no anda. Pero
hard issue.
my car was, oh my God, it's so much.
That's good, my kind of partner. Nice. I'd like to see it. Maybe that's where we've met before. Or I just remember you from being in a room together. You've certainly been in meetings. Yes.
I mean, I've never hit you, but it's been like.
I was on the board of the Federation.
Anyway, very impressive to hear.
So, San Diego, if you're working in civic leadership, we all cross paths. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've had this kind of conversation and then we eventually figure it out. Right, and it may just be the chamber for a while.
Real promotions out of UCSD, even if this issue is only
Right. Right. Not very often, but every once in a while. Every once in a while. But yeah, all right, well, good to meet you. I'm looking forward to seeing that display. It's down there now? Oh, so where's it now?
All those issues.
And that's what the Great. I think about that a lot. We're not quite there yet.
Okay.
So it's nothing, but it's important information for people to have after sitting drinking coffee for 3 hours.
Yeah, running, we're talking about sewage and the.
Oh, you're right.
Doesn't work. For maintenance. Yeah, but we only have to go upstairs.
And it was closed for an hour, and it's open again. Everybody's making 20%. But it's great. But it's actually really good information. A little tight. More impactful.
You will have one.
That would be great.
Make sure the engine, that's what they would have. We did this with this project. I did the same thing again. We never had a problem with that, but all part convention center, high rise, sewer project. Those were coordinated with people don't understand. You don't understand. They say, what's the outcome? What's the report? The outcome is we have to do it.
Right now. And the big reason we did it was to make sure the public had the right information. From somebody who wasn't there. And why did you do that? It's a done deal. There's the deal. What's the point?
it's a lot because we've got too many people that don't have enough work. So, like all these other
Through one of my board members, who recommended to me, said, why don't you bother doing that?
Wrong information. People don't, just look at Tijuana River stuff. Same meetings. Then when I also.
Right. I'm with you on that.
So, you're having fun?
We know it's challenging, we know it's hard, and
Well, nobody's in charge. No, tell me who's in charge of doing it all. Well, there's not gonna get done, for Christ's sake. You learn that in junior high school.
it's a lot longer when nobody's in charge. You gotta know it.
Right.
Come on.
It's government business. Well, that's what Serge said. You lose this scale piece or and I know.
Yeah.
It's so long. You know,
Decades.
oh, you know, I did I was shocked because that was early in my career. 24 agencies that were involved with San Diego Bay Water Company. I thought it was a total aberration. It's not a fucking aberration, it's the world.
Yeah. It's dumb. It's normal, but it's dumb.
Okay.
Yeah.
You do want to, sometimes I like benevolence on it.
Yeah.
But usually.
Maybe the first one is, but you never know who that next one is.
Let's see if we can all get back to our seats, if the panel can come back together, and we'll start the Q&A.
Also the successful drafter of the report. They have this pen. And we're gonna try when we're done here, in front of the screen, we can get a picture.
Oh, really? Are you a competitor?
But the major donors and supporters.
All right.
There's no way.
Yeah, tell you what, you can hold that and then I'll look.
Can we have the panelists back to the tables, please?
Okay, so you want to ship it back to Mexico?
Ted Wright is slowing progress.
I heard.
we've met a number of different times. They've done a lot of fantastic work for this. I run the Mexico. Put money into preventing cancer and all that stuff.
That's how it goes. Everything's in sewer.
Well, it's like so, it's like right. It's like, but everything for the U.S.-Mexico border, it's like all. It's like you got 100 different agencies. Every problem. But it's like, as you just heard from Serge. Around the edges, but until you get another president who really cares, you're not going. You're not really going anywhere. Well, right now they don't have. Right now they're fixing.
No, for me.
They don't have a organization.
We're getting started now. We have a brief announcement from the San Diego Foundation. If I can get everybody's attention, please. Can I get your attention, please? I know a couple panelists are still on the way, but we've almost quieted down.
It's not one person, it's an organization.
But it's a lot of different. But we work together better.
Before we get started, the San Diego Foundation representative, I'll let her introduce herself as an announcement about a funding opportunity, kind of in the category of solution.
I'm very short. I hope everybody can hear me. Thank you. My name is Yamilet Carrillo. I'm the Senior Program Manager at the Binational Resilience Initiative within the San Diego Foundation. We currently have an open call for proposals looking for projects and programs that address coastal resilience through a binational collaborative effort. And this is open to nonprofit organizations, but also tax-exempt organizations that are kind of equivalent nonprofit status, so academia, government agencies, and you can find everything about the current request for proposals at the San Diego Foundation Binational Resilience Initiative. You can find us there. I'm going to see if somebody from my team can put in the chat the link to the open RFP. The call for proposals ends on May 5th at 5 p.m. It's open to US and Mexican organizations, and we are really looking for effective binational collaborative projects and programs. And for our federal and local and state agencies, I would like to just invite everybody to please consider funding binationally. I know that a lot of funding investments have multiple restrictions, and a lot of the grant making stops at the border. We are trying to eliminate the grant making barrier in this region, because we know that we cannot address binational issues without binational collaboration and binational funding. So thank you very much, and let me know if anybody has any questions. I'll be around. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We had a good in-depth session, 2 panels prior to the break. I hope everybody enjoyed their break. It looked like we're having a good time talking with each other. We're following in the Friends and Relationships Development Department, so good work out there. This session, we're going to talk about solutions. And as I was listening to the speakers, I wrote some solutions down. Maybe by starting, I'm going to just read those real quickly, and then ask our panel, what solutions do we miss? And what do you think we should prioritize in the way of thinking about those solutions? I heard the importance of water reuse, about the power of the private sector, about changing governance, using a preferred alternative as our priority, developing an information exchange, major financial investments, responsive officials, and then just more advocacy. That was my short list. I'm sure I didn't catch it all, but let's go to the panel and say what solutions did we miss or should be on that list, and what should the priority be? You want to start, Richard? You're right here. Should.
Look, I think this this covers a lot. I think overall, we're dealing with a complex issue because, as Margarita said, we have these economic asymmetries between U.S. and Mexico, San Diego, Tijuana, but we have a growing opportunity here in our region because of the geopolitics that we see today, the growing tensions between China and the U.S., which is going to lead to major near sourcing in our region. It's already happening. Both our economies are going to benefit, but we're looking at this on the cheap. I was just mentioning to Malin during the coffee break that in 1985, the city of San Diego had a blue ribbon commission to look at the Tijuana problem because they were concerned that they could not keep servicing Tijuana's water, which, by the way, Tijuana was paying, or Mexico was paying for to be able to treat the water. So that blue ribbon committee came up with a study in 1985 that estimated for a state-of-the-art facility in Tijuana, 100 million gallons a day, it was going to cost between $750 and $1 billion. So, of course, the city of San Diego freaks out, and after a lot of back and forth, they came up with a solution, which was $27 million, which was not going to really, it was going to be a Band-Aid approach. So then the focus was on lobbying the feds to get the South Bay wastewater treatment plant. And so what I see reflecting on sort of this history is that we've been doing things on the cheap. We know the growth that is going to happen in Tijuana over the coming years because of the near sourcing. And so we need to think big. We need to be bold. We need to take advantage of the San Diego Tijuana World Design Capital, which is going to be in 2024, and look at doing something that will solve our long-term needs, not just for wastewater treatment, but water reuse, because as many speakers have already mentioned, both San Diego and Tijuana are going to be experiencing drought. I think if we think creatively, we look at engaging the private sector, because we can, the feds, the federal government, and our public sector in general can't do it alone. This needs to be a public-private partnership if we're going to solve it. But the economies of the San Diego, Tijuana, this San Diego Tijuana region have a lot to gain if we can figure this out. And the cost to our economy, our tourist economy, and our quality of life is being impacted by these sewage spills on both sides of the border. So I think it's a combination of focus on political will, focus on the financing, and expand the financial cooperation. We have a lot of people here in this room that can move things forward.
Thank you, Richard. And just as an add to that, I often wonder how the world's largest economy and the world's 15th largest economy can somehow come together to solve a problem of a small river like the Tijuana River when we're so well integrated in all ways. So, Sally.
So one of the concerns is we build this infrastructure, but will it be maintained properly for the long term? Minute 328 does give the International Boundary and Water Commission some oversight authority, but I wanted to share another idea with you. That's something that our agency head, Commissioner Mayer, has been talking about, and I think you're going to see more activity on this over the next year or two, which is to establish some sort of a binational maintenance infrastructure fund. We've seen so many instances along the border where something happens, and I think about, there's this tiny little town on the Arizona-Sonora border called Naco, and we've had more sanitation headaches with that little bitty town than you can possibly imagine, because they just don't have money to maintain their very basic wastewater infrastructure system. And so you have a collapsed pipeline right at the border, and it's causing the sewage to flow over. And the federal government of the United States doesn't have any authority to go in and fix it or spend appropriated money to fix it. But for some tiny little investment or relatively small investment, you could solve that transboundary wastewater flow problem. And the tiny little town of Naco, Sonora doesn't have a penny even to pay their electric bills, right? So I think our commissioner has articulated a vision of being able to establish a maintenance infrastructure fund, so that if you had a pump that failed in one of the canyons in the Tijuana River Valley, and Mexico, for whatever reason, just didn't have the money to fix it right away, that there would be a fund that you could tap into and get an immediate solution, which is much better than having wastewater flows through that canyon for 5 months, 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, while you wait for somebody to come up with some money to fix it. So I think that's going to be a part of the solution, and that our current administration at IWC is working on.
Had a new thought. Good one. Thank you, David.
A couple of things, just to reiterate points that were made earlier. The funding that was provided by Congress of Mexico did not envision the costs of upgrading the treatment plant to meet its needs. It's a almost 30-year-old plant, and components, as Sally indicated, are failing. If we spend the money that they provided to bring the plant up to stuff to be able to expand it, we end up not having enough to extend it to something useful. We end up repeating what we've done before, which is building a half measure, something we needed 10 years ago, will get us for a short time. But the other thing I wanted to highlight was that I've made reference to, and Sally provided you a lot of details on the programmatic environmental impact statement. But that impact statement is really worth reading, because it is a very thorough, very detailed, and very digested analysis of the cross-border pollution issues faced by both countries. And it proposes a long range of projects, and I've advocated for a fullest implementation of all those projects, because among the things we haven't really talked much about today, although Sally provided some interesting insights, is trash. And so I'm happy to report that the state of California, I glanced over these in my talk and left it out in the interest of being a little bit shorter, has provided funding for 2 trash booms for the Tijuana River, one for Smuggler's Gulch and one for the main channel. The main channel project is a pilot project. It's intended to study and evaluate the design and need and how much trash we're going to really pull off in a storm event. It's not a dry weather flow capture device. This is a storm event capture device. And that channel goes from 0 to 16,000 cubic feet per second in almost no time at all. So it has to be robust. And then you have to manage and maintain and operate, and then eventually plan for replacement of things like that. But the recovery strategy envisioned those projects, as well as a hydrology and habitat improvement project in sediment basins in Smuggler's Gulch. And so I'm very happy that effort that Carl made along with us on the recovery strategy, we're actually now seeing California invest in. So the final point I want to share is that we've talked about a shared investment program for capital and maintenance costs. California and Mexico can have a partnership on this. And I believe lawmakers in California have already spoken to this opportunity to provide funding from California sources for projects in Mexico, with mutual assurances about how they're maintained and operated and how effective they are going forward. I think that is still an open question, how we really do that. And I think there's some institutional and legal changes that we need to overcome. But I think we've never had a more ripe or propitious moment than we have right now for those kinds of changes that we achieve a tipping point with. So thank you again, Carl. Thank you for your work 10 years ago on the recovery strategy that I glanced over. And then thank you again for this opportunity today.
Thank you, David. It was a privilege to work with you on that. And just one more comment. I also have an international nonprofit working on ocean plastic. And when you go think about the scale of things, we look at the Tijuana River. The ocean cleanup has done some information on ocean plastic, and I think they estimate that 72,000 kilograms a year go into the ocean from the Tijuana River. when you look at the rivers of the world, the Pasig River, which is the most polluted river in the world, puts 630,000 kilograms of plastic waste into the ocean every year. So we got to be able to solve this problem here if we're going to be able to try to solve it in the rivers of the world. So Margarita, go ahead. Sorry, I'm editorializing.
Thank you. And also, like what I explained it and the information that they just shared, I want to add that with this maintenance thing that you're talking about is, yeah, it's crucial. Like we put some infrastructure and it's not maintained, well, it will be great. Like you have a 30 years life utility, but if you don't take care of it in 10 years, it's gone. So the investment is gone. But it has to be wrapped up with information and the capacity, like you're saying, like we have to build the capacity in Mexico to have these programs self-maintenance. Like if you can give money, like we can have a fund and there's a fund for maintenance, but you don't have the technicians, you don't have the capacity of the water authority. And also we are talking about cultural things. We have to talk about water, culture of water. And this is another thing about culture, like how we deal with things and how we have to change the way we're dealing with things. And it's cultural, so it will take a lot of time. And also to have this wrap up, this is going to be a fund, or they're thinking about this maintenance fund, it has to be wrapped up with accountability, transparency, like how it's going to be tracked, this money, how it's going to be deal with this infrastructure. And also that the solution for this problem is not just infrastructure. The solution of this problem is everybody, because right now, and having the whole information, that's why I'm talking about information, because it's what you're saying, and I'm very happy again, and I was very amazed, and the work that was done in the PVC pump station, and like you said, it was great. In dry season, the pump was working perfect, the river was flowing, they captured the water was not going to the estuary. Yes, we are so happy in the US side, because in the Mexican side, where the water is going? That water is going directly to our beaches. Raw sewage is going, because the water doesn't go into the treatment plant. It goes behind the treatment plant, directly to the ocean. So it was great for the US, yes, but it was a problem here. So we have to see like the whole information, like what's the impact here, what's the impact here, and having these solutions and taking into account the principles that I was talking about, and trying to sit down and talk about the whole thing. But yes, I think that only the pipes, also the infrastructure, the military 28, great. The investment is going to be done, great. The investment from Mexico, great. But it's the water that is in the pipe. The water that is in the pipe is going to be solve the problem. But are we talking about the water is not in the pipe? The water that is polluting the river, the water that is running into the creeks to the US is not in the pipe. It won't be solved. It won't be solved. So we have to take into account. And then we have cultural things, we have economic things, we have people that are living in areas that are not supposed to be living because they don't have the money to do that, because they're working in the maquila and they've got enough money. So we have to deal with all these things. And I think information it's a way of having the information on hand for decision making, the whole equation, the whole data, then we will do better decisions. But yes, I think it's the first step. Yes, let's put the money on the table.
Thank you, Margarita. Let's go to Chris Helmer.
So you asked, what's a priority? And my answer is everything's a priority. But one of the benefits we do have here, which has been one of our constraints in the past, but we have so many agencies involved in this watershed that everyone has a share in the infrastructure, in the policy, in the restoration, and the new policies that have to happen. So there's enough folks here to really step up and be leading on all of these issues that are really important for us to really truly success this. And then if there's this binational, what do you call it, the architectural forum for the binational region, that's another opportunity to highlight, it's not just the infrastructure we're building, but it's the wastewater that actually protects and enhances the environment. So I think everywhere needs to be leading on this.
Thanks, Chris. Serge?
Yeah, I didn't mention it, but I really think we need to build, climate resiliency. And it was great that Yamlet was here talking about the new grant opportunity, because it's clear that, we need to build efficiency into the system. And really, when we're talking about the United States, Mexico, and getting to the Paris Climate Treaty, agreement and meeting our emissions reductions goals, that they really incentivize that system and put it into the Tijuana River, solution system, because it's an incredibly energy wasting process to move huge amounts of water around to eventually dump in the ocean through heavy fuel oil funded, power plants. So I think that's really going to be the one alternative, is putting a climate lens on this, which has to happen and is already happening. I know with the EPA and the State Department and the NatBank and the IBWC. Number two, again, really doubling down on these micro solutions that the San Diego Foundation and the Benioff Ocean Institute at UC Santa Barbara is funding, and NOAA, where we really finance these micro level sort of issues like the trash boom that we built in Lorella, I think we do in Camino Verde, the San Diego Foundation supported. That's really, it's a great investment. It doesn't cost that much money, and it can be done really quickly and engage the communities sort of in coming up with these problems. One thing about all of this is a solution. And David Victor at UC San Diego, who's sort of a brilliant theorist on how we get about the theory of change, is talking about we're solving the climate crisis because small groups of people in the private sector and governments and communities are innovating, and they're focusing on solutions and doing things rather than spending all their time talking about doing things. And they're not letting the obstacles get in the way of the solutions. And that's how we're going to solve this. We spend all our time talking about why we can't do something, we're not going to fix it. We need to incentivize and finance the actual problem solving and get it done quickly, because with that learning and that sort of innovating, we're going to innovate more and we move forward more quickly.
And when I said priority, Chris said they're all priorities, but you've got to rank priorities. And if we have an understanding mutually in the cross-border region, just in the instance of sewage, of what projects need to be done, tangible projects, whether it's a simple trash boom or upgrade of a pump station or building a new water treatment plant, whatever they are, there's no reason why we can't together understand what those options are, what their estimated cost is, not by a full engineer estimate, by between $10 and $20 million, between $100 and $200,000, and what agency is responsible in that area. There's no reason we can't rank those and prioritize those and jointly go and try to find money with the help of federal and state agencies and international agencies to try to accomplish those goals. But we need the information and we need to work together and line that up. And that's when we formed the Tijuana River Valley Recovery Team, was the idea. What are the important projects? What are the priorities? What's it going to cost? Let's work together to solve it. And as David said, there's 3 of those projects after 15 more years of finally started happening. And there's the time factor. How about an international perspective from Kevin?
I don't know if I can be as eloquent as we've heard so far, but look, I think at the end of the day, when we work internationally, we find that there are different priorities, there are different languages that we use. Not to say there's an adversarial relationship. Businesses are focused on profitability, they're focused on productivity issues. In the labor sphere, we use the F word a lot. We use fairness, and that's not something that really fits into a business model. Also, it's about timeframes. I think, for a lot of businesses, if you don't act quickly, if you don't move now, you don't get a piece of that market. But for policy lags behind. It takes a while to develop these regulations. Now, regulation can be seen as red tape and so, but, governments do move slow because there are a lot of elements that you need to check. I think the other element is that, when you're on the business side, you're looking at your sort of shareholder model. When you're in the private sector, the public sector, you're looking at a shareholder model. I'm contributing my time and energy to a company. I want to make sure that I'm considered in that as well too. And we often see that, in this instance, in terms of environmental, profits are prioritized and costs are socialized. Coming from New York, you've got the Superfund sites, Gowanus, it's the old Brooklyn Navy Yard, and there's billions of dollars going in to clean that up. In Staten Island, the wetlands, there's radon there, and it wasn't until they started seeing that the leukemia rates in Staten Island were 5 times higher than the national rates until they did something. In Bangladesh, I mean, maybe apropos of what we're talking about here, they eliminated the single-use plastic many, many years ago because it was clogging up their sanitation system. And it was total flooding because of the topography of the country as well. So it sometimes takes the governments to do due diligence laws, for example, which are coming out of Europe, where the hold and release orders we have in the United States for people accessing the markets. So I think the most important element in all of this is sitting down, talking to people, understanding the other side, listening to their concerns, developing the data, developing the statistics, doing proof of concept on that. I think it really requires a bit more of a discussion. But again, we're on two different timeframes. We do different languages, and we judge success by different metrics.
Thank you, Kevin. I want to jump. We're almost out of time, unfortunately, but I want to jump to a couple of questions from the audience. Really short one. Maybe Sally, you know the answer to this one, or David. Does Tijuana have sewage pipes throughout the city? Anybody know?
Mostly. There are areas of Tijuana that are underserved, where CEST is still trying to expand. Our initial argument to US EPA was that by investing mutually in the programmatic approach, that Mexico would have more funds to expand their service for both water and wastewater, which I still think is true.
Yeah, thank you. My understanding is that 90% of the properties in Tijuana are plumbed for sewage, and the average in Mexico is 50%. So in some ways, they're working harder than any place else. Somebody said, if we did a letter campaign, who should it be directed to and what should it say? Malin said, hey, who's in charge here? If you want to be an advocate, where do you aim your missives? Thoughts?
Serge? Congressional delegation, our senators. I think that, they've done an outstanding job, but I definitely think we need to continue to put pressure on people to move this process forward and allocate more funding.
Thank you. Has anybody done a comprehensive look, if we wanted to wave our magic wand and say we can fix this thing, done a comprehensive cost assessment of, and I know by comprehensive, I don't mean every little detail, I mean kind of big picture of what it might cost to clean this up and have be happy. David?
Yeah, I think I've pointed to it now several times. The US EPA in their programmatic environmental impact statement is a very clear-eyed, very quantitative, very thorough analysis of the watershed loads, the pathways of conveyances, and the options available, the capital costs for those, and at least projected operations and maintenance. In the US, the County of San Diego put together a needs and opportunities assessment for US-side projects to deal with sediment, trash, and water quality. Again, very clear-eyed, very carefully calculated operations and maintenance costs, as well as the capital costs, and the net benefits, as well as the unintended consequences to communities. I would also point out that EPA really studied what are the impacts of those projects that are proposed on the communities in Tijuana and in San Ysidro. So it's a very thorough analysis. And it is, I think, the place to go for the comprehensive solution, as has been pointed to by several speakers.
Was there any dollar number put on that?
It's more than $474 million. I would have to look to Doug Lyden what the latest costs are. And I would also point out that the costs that we've all experienced with inflation increases have changed the analysis somewhat. But we're certainly only about halfway there, I believe, in terms of funding that we would need to really build out all of alternative to the preferred alternative.
Okay, all right, that's helpful. Another question I think was asked, what are some of the longer term solutions? We talked about that, to the degree we can in the time allowed. Another one, if we can't get full funding for the EPA secondary treatment, then how can we make the best solution for Tijuana happen? I think we are at secondary treatment and will continue to be. Is that correct, Sally?
So perhaps the question is, what if there is insufficient funding currently available to double the size of the secondary treatment plant? Okay. And my feeling is, I think, Chris, you talked about like it's a down payment, what we have right now in terms of the funding. And my belief is that our community, our stakeholders, our elected officials want to get the job done, and they'll make sure that the funding is available to get the job done, at least the initial doubling of the existing treatment plan. That would be my expectation, that additional funding would be forthcoming.
Go ahead,
I do agree that it's a good down payment, but as I've mentioned before, in 1990, we provided a down payment, and it was not enough by the time the facility was completed in 1999. And I believe we're going to be there again with this facility if we don't come together and find a public-private solution. And I believe we need to be starting to look at tertiary treatment for Tijuana so we can focus on water reuse. San Diego's doing it, the Pure Water Program. We need to do it also on the other side of the border, because otherwise we're going to have a crisis on the border, which is not just about sewage, it's about lack of water, drought, and migration if we don't address this bigger issue.
Real quickly.
Real quick. That also to see this problem, to decentralize the problem, like we want to fix like all the water of Tijuana in one spot, in one treatment plant. We have communities, so we have these new developments. So to start to change in the law, the ways it's the permits to say you have to take care of your water, you have to reuse your water in your communities, go community by community, and also green infrastructure. So we can do these small projects, and we can start dividing the city in small sections and then treat the water like Serge is saying, like the amount of energy that is invested in moving the water from one point to another is a lot. So we have to also, that's why I'm saying we have to change the way. We keep saying it's centralized, it's one treatment plant. No, we can have 400 treatment plants, small treatment plants that will maintain. We can do the capacity and do the co-responsibility to more people, to more cities.
One last comment before we close. You know, in my history, which is over 40 years of being involved in some way with this, I've seen it comes in waves. And something happens, there's a crisis, there's a big sewer break or multiple sewer breaks, everybody gets angry, they go to the government, they write their legislators, and we get a solution. And that solution in this most recent one happened in 2017 with the Incidentes pipeline break and the ones that have followed. So that was 2017. In 2019, we had, the $300 million had been allocated. EPA did environmental work that David referred to. We finally got the IBWC minute. Was it last year? The IBWC minute last year, which kind of laid things out and moved forward. The Mexican government put money in. By the time that's done, it's going to be 2027, if I remember the last report I saw. So we've got 10 years between crisis and into solution. And what happens is, from an activist perspective, and I don't mean rabid activism, I mean us keeping involved and pushing forward, it numbs us for that period of time until there's another crisis. So the question is, how do we keep the interest and the pressure on throughout that period of time, celebrating our successes, recognizing it's a down payment and it's not enough? That's the question we need to answer if we're going to solve these problems, so that we don't have to wait for the next crisis to start a whole new wave, start it all up again. So with that, I'm going to close my part of the session, and I want to thank our panelists again. Hang on one second.
We have one more.
Yeah, we have a question.
Can I take 2 minutes?
Sure.
Thank you.
Would you let me, let's congratulate the panel while they listen to great work.
Thank you very much. And I'm not in charge of anything, but I started the Vernon Center for Community Advancement 2.5 years ago. And Pat Parson, our CEO and president, came up with a byline explaining what the organization's all about. And that is 4 words: good ideas aren't enough. And that is what happened here for the last 3 hours. We've got good ideas, but it's not enough. And it's all about leadership. There is no leadership in this room today that is in charge of the Mexican sewage problem. It's not going to get done until we engage leadership. And Chris, you said it very well. Leadership matters. 2 words, very, very important. I'm not saying individually we're not leaders. I'm saying the organization in charge of the Mexican sewer problem is not in this room. We're wasting our time. Am I understood? Now, I don't know who should be in charge. I don't have any magic wand. It could be the city of Tijuana. It could be the Northern Baja government. It could be the national government of Mexico. But somebody, some organization has to come in and take charge of this and take all of these good ideas that we've been talking about and do something with it. Otherwise, it's not going to get done.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for all of your good work. Early in my career, I produced a television show about San Diego Bay pollution that aired in prime time on 2 stations. And what shocked me was that there were 24 different agencies that were involved in San Diego Bay water quality. And I thought it was an aberration, but it's not. It's the reality of how we solve problems in the United States, at least today. So we have to recognize that and figure out how you pull that together. With that, I'd like to introduce Catherine Greenberg, the Vice President for San Diego World Affairs Council, who is really the person who pulled all this together, worked diligently for weeks to make this happen. She deserves a big round of applause.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a few closing remarks since we're concluding. Thanks for your time and presence here. It really is wonderful to have everyone's support. I also wanted to do some thank yous. First, a big shout out to Kira Shalat from Classics for Kids, also a fellow San Diego World Affairs Council board member. She helped write the grant that made this event possible. So thank you so much, Karen. I want to thank our panelists. We put this together at pretty short notice, and you guys have all been amazing. I also want to thank Sophia Eichner with the DCCA, who was just wonderful and supportive of this program. With the Institute of Americas, I couldn't have done this without her and all of her guidance. Also, and Francesca, who was here. An enormous thank you to Carl Nettleton, our moderator. He's been an incredible ally and has been so helpful in the planning and execution of this event. And a final thank you to the organizations that made today's event possible, the World Affairs Councils of America and the International Labor Organization through their Engage America 2023 grant. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and I hope that you'll consider being a member and helping us engage more with the public on issues just like this. Thank you.
Let's keep coming back together. Good to see you all. Thank you for coming.
I was a U.S. AID. I was a police officer for almost 30 years.